and crawled into bed without bothering to close the blinds. Light didn't matter when you were this tired. Sleep came fast but stayed shallow, the way it always did after a shift. I drifted in that strange territory between waking and dreaming where sounds from the building became part of half-formed narratives my brain tried to construct. The pipes groaning became footsteps. The rain became whispers. The building settling became breathing. I woke around 3 in the afternoon with my mouth dry and my head foggy. The rain had stopped, leaving behind that particular silence that feels too complete, too absolute. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I saw it. The access panel to the crawl space above my bed was off-center. Not by much. Maybe 2 millimeters, maybe less. But I'd stared at that panel every day for the 8 months I'd lived here, and it had always sat flush within its frame, a perfect square of textured white composite that blended seamlessly with the ceiling tiles around it. Now, the left edge jutted down slightly, creating a hairline shadow that shouldn't have been there. I sat up slowly, my heart rate beginning to climb. The panel was directly above the head of my bed, about 7 feet up. To move it, someone would need to stand on something, a chair, a stepladder, and push it aside. I definitely hadn't done that. I had no reason to access the crawl space. I didn't even own a ladder. The building manager had come by 2 weeks ago to check the water heater in the closet, but he hadn't mentioned going into the ceiling. And wouldn't he have mentioned it if he had? Wouldn't there have been some kind of notice? I got out of bed and stood beneath the panel, tilting my head back until my neck ached. From this angle, I could see a sliver of darkness where the edge didn't quite meet the frame. The gap was maybe a 1/4 inch wide, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. But once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. I dragged the single wooden chair from my kitchenette table over to the bed, climbed up on the mattress, and positioned the chair carefully. Standing on it brought my head level with the panel. Up close, I could see dust disturbed along the edges, as if fingers had recently gripped and lifted. My stomach tightened. I pressed my palm against the composite and pushed. The panel lifted easily, too easily, with none of the resistance or scraping sound it should have made if it had been sitting undisturbed for months. Someone had definitely moved this recently. Someone had oiled the edges or filed them down or done something to make it slide silently. I pushed the panel aside and peered into the darkness above. The crawl space was perhaps 3 feet high, floored with pink fiberglass insulation between exposed joists. I could make out the vague shapes of ductwork and pipes receding into shadow, but nothing else. No movement, no sound except the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. The air that drifted down smelled stale and faintly organic, like unwashed fabric or body odor left in a closed space. I jerked my head back and nearly fell off the chair. That smell hadn't been there before. I would have noticed it before, wouldn't I? I climbed down, replaced the chair at the table, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring up at the displaced panel. My hands were shaking slightly, and I pressed them between my knees to stop the tremor. There had to be an explanation. Maintenance had been up there and forgotten to properly reseat the panel, or maybe the building's settling had shifted it somehow, and the smell was just accumulated dust and old insulation. But the fingerprints on the stairwell handrail whispered differently, and the silence of the panel's movement suggested intention, not accident. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that exhaustion and isolation were playing tricks on my perception. I'd been working too many doubles lately, sleeping too little, existing in that strange liminal space of reversed schedules where you're never quite sure what day it is or what time your body thinks it should be. Stress manifests in strange ways. Maybe I was manufacturing mysteries where none existed. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to distract myself with my phone, scrolling through news feeds and message boards, but my attention kept drifting back to the ceiling. Eventually, I gave up and got ready for my shift. I showered, dressed, microwaved some pasta, and left for work, deliberately not looking at the panel as I walked out the door. The shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and paperwork. I tried to focus on the manifests, on the endless columns of tracking numbers and container IDs, but my mind kept circling back to that displaced panel, to those fingerprints, to that smell. Around 3 in the morning, during my break, I pulled out my phone and called the building's after-hours dispatch number. A woman answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick with sleep. I explained about the access panel, trying to sound casual, just a tenant with a minor maintenance concern. Had anyone been up in the crawl space recently? Any work done on the HVAC or plumbing in my unit? She put me on hold, and I listened to generic jazz music while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. When she came back, she told me there had been no scheduled maintenance in my unit for the past month. The last entry in the log was from 6 weeks ago, when they'd replaced a circuit breaker in the electrical panel. If I was concerned about the access panel, I could submit a work order and someone would come take a look within 3 to 5 business days. 3 to 5 business days. I thanked her and hung up. I finished my shift in a state of mounting unease that I couldn't quite articulate. By the time I clocked out at 6:30, the sky was beginning to lighten behind layers of cloud, and I'd half convinced myself to just push the panel back into place and forget the whole thing. But as I climbed the stairs to my floor, I found myself studying the handrail again. The fingerprints were still there, now overlaid with new prints from other residents, but still visible beneath them, still fresh enough to distinguish. Inside my apartment, everything looked normal. The panel hadn't moved any further. The smell seemed fainter, or maybe I'd just grown accustomed to it. I ate breakfast, brushed my teeth, and lay down to sleep. That's when I heard it. A sound from above, soft, barely audible over the ambient noise of the building. The whisper of something sliding against something else. Plastic against wood, maybe, or fabric against drywall. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, then stopped. I held my breath, staring up at the panel. Nothing moved. The sound didn't repeat. But my heart was hammering now, and sleep felt impossible. I waited 10 minutes, 20, listening so intently that my ears began to create phantom sounds in the silence. Finally, I got up, grabbed my phone, and called the dispatch number again. The same woman answered. I explained that I was hearing noises from the crawl space above my unit, that I was concerned someone might have accessed it without authorization. Could security come check it out? She sighed. I could hear her exhaustion through the phone, but agreed to send someone over. I stayed on the line while she contacted the night security guard, confirmed he was on his way. The whole time, I kept my eyes fixed on the panel. I heard the guard arrive about 15 minutes later. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, a knock at my door. I let him in, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a gut that strained against his uniform shirt. He looked annoyed at being called away from whatever he'd been doing, but his expression shifted when I showed him the displaced panel. We dragged my table over, and he climbed up to investigate while I stood below, phone ready to call 911 if needed. He shone his flashlight into the crawl space, swept it back and forth across the insulation and joists. Then he went very still. His silence stretched long enough that I felt my stomach drop. Finally, he climbed down, his face carefully neutral in that way people's faces become when they're trying not to alarm you. "There's something up there," he said quietly. "Someone's been up there." He called for backup, then went back up for a second look while we waited. This time, he took photos with his phone. When he climbed down again, he showed me the images. My hands went numb as I swiped through them. The first photo showed a thermal emergency blanket, the kind hikers carry, folded neatly on a flat section of plywood that had been placed across the joists. The second showed impressions in the insulation, knee marks, handprints, places where someone's weight had compressed the pink fibers. The third photo made my throat close. A chalk line drawn on the wooden joist, running for several feet before terminating directly above where my pillow would be. The guard asked if I had any idea who might have done this, if I'd had any disputes with neighbors or ex-partners, if I'd noticed anyone paying unusual attention to me. I could barely process his questions. Someone had been living, or at least spending time, in the crawl space above my bed. Sleeping there, maybe, or just lying there, watching, waiting. Additional security arrived, then the police. They documented everything, took statements, dusted for prints. They found more evidence: a water bottle, empty granola bar wrappers, a small battery-operated LED light. Someone had created a nest up there, a hiding spot maintained through multiple visits. The access panel had been carefully modified, its edges filed smooth, small felt pads glued to the frame to prevent any sound when opened or closed. The officers asked all the same questions the guard had. I gave them what answers I could, though I felt like I was speaking from very far away. They told me they'd increase patrols around the building, that I should consider staying somewhere else for a few nights while they investigated. One of them, a younger officer with sincere eyes, suggested I might want to talk to someone, get some support. She gave me a card for a crisis counselor. After they all left, I sat on my bed and stared at the now fully removed panel propped against the wall. The ceiling gaped open above me, revealing ductwork and wiring in the underside of the fourth floor. I should have felt relief that the police had taken the situation seriously, that they'd documented everything, that I wasn't crazy for sensing something wrong. Instead, I felt invaded, violated. The thought of someone crouched in that small space, directly above me while I slept, watching through that carefully silenced panel, it made my skin crawl in ways I couldn't articulate. How many nights had they been up there? How long had this been going on? The chalk line suggested planning, intention, a level of premeditation that went beyond opportunistic trespassing. I didn't sleep that day. I couldn't. Every sound made me flinch. I kept imagining I could smell that stale odor again, kept thinking I heard plastic rustling or feet shifting against insulation. Around noon, I packed a bag and checked into a motel near the depot. The police had told me it was safe to stay in my apartment. They'd thoroughly searched the crawl space, found no evidence anyone was currently hiding there, but safe felt like a relative term now. I stayed at the motel for 3 nights. On the 4th day, the building manager called to tell me they'd installed a lock on the access panel in my unit, that they were adding locks to all the panels in the building. Security footage was being reviewed. They were taking this very seriously. I moved back in on a Friday afternoon. The new lock was substantial, a thick padlock hasp bolted through both the panel and the frame. It would be impossible to open from inside the crawl space. The manager gave me the only key. That first night back, I couldn't bring myself to sleep beneath the panel. I dragged my mattress to the opposite wall and set up my bed there, pushed my small dresser against the door for extra security. I bought a battery-powered radio and kept it on low all night, filling the silence with voices and music. I also bought a cheap security camera and aimed it at the locked panel, setting it to record continuously to a cloud server. For a week, nothing happened. The footage showed an empty room, the panel motionless. I started to relax incrementally, to feel almost foolish about the radio and the displaced mattress. The police hadn't found whoever had been in the crawl space. They'd lifted some partial prints, but nothing in the system matched. But the building had been secured. The access points had been locked. It was over. Then, on a Wednesday morning, I came home from my shift and checked the camera footage. The panel was 2 millimeters out of alignment. I watched the recorded footage 3 times, my mouth dry. Nothing moved in the frame. No one entered the room. The panel simply appeared slightly off-center in the morning footage when it had been flushed the night before. The lock was still in place, undisturbed, but the panel beneath it had shifted. I called building security, called the police, called the manager. They all came, they all looked. The consensus was that the building had settled, that temperature changes or humidity fluctuations had caused the panel to shift minutely within its frame. The lock was intact. No one had accessed the crawl space. I was safe. But I keep the radio on now, every night. I keep the camera recording. I check the footage every morning when I get home from my shift, studying each frame for any sign of movement, any evidence that I'm not imagining the subtle shifts I keep noticing. The panel moves. I'm sure it does, just slightly, just enough to notice if you're watching closely enough. The police stopped returning my calls after the 3rd false alarm. The building manager suggested, diplomatically, that I might benefit from speaking with a professional about my stress levels. My coworkers have started to notice the dark circles under my eyes, the way I startle at sudden sounds. Sometimes, in that space between sleep and waking, I think I can hear it again. The whisper of plastic against wood, the soft compression of weight against insulation. The camera never captures anything. The lock never shows signs of tampering. But every few nights, the panel shifts. Just 2 millimeters. Just enough. I've started to wonder if I'm losing my mind, if the initial violation has rewired something in my brain that now manufactures threats where none exist. But then I remember those fingerprints on the handrail, that careful chalk line terminating above my pillow, and I absolutely know, that something was real. What I can't determine is whether it still is. Last night I woke to the sound of my own breathing, amplified and strange in the darkness. The radio had somehow switched off. In the silence I could hear the building's nighttime sounds, the hum of refrigerators through thin walls, the distant rumble of traffic on the street outside, the tick of pipes expanding and contracting. And beneath it all, or maybe I imagined it, the softest whisper of exhalation from somewhere above. I didn't move. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the locked panel illuminated by the camera's faint LED, and I wondered, if I'm imagining these sounds, these movements, these signs, does that make me safer or less safe? If the threat is only in my mind, can it still hurt me? If I've manufactured a monster from stress and isolation and exhaustion, does that monster become real through the sheer force of my belief in it? The panel hasn't moved since I woke. The camera will show nothing when I check it tomorrow. The lock will remain intact. But I can still smell it sometimes, that stale organic scent, and I can't tell anymore if it's coming from above or if my brain is simply replaying a memory on an endless loop. I still sleep with the radio on. I still check the footage every morning. I still measure the gap between the panel and its frame with my eyes, looking for those telltale 2 millimeters that prove I'm not crazy, that prove something is still wrong. Because the alternative, that I'm doing this to myself, that I've become my own intruder, my own source of terror, is somehow worse than the idea that someone is actually up there, watching and waiting. The lock is secure, the panel is still, but I know, or I think I know, or I need to believe, that when I close my eyes tonight, something above me will shift in the darkness, just barely, just enough to prove I was right all along. Story 2. The house smelled like old newspapers and something else underneath. Something mineral and damp that reminded me of caves. Uncle Raymond had been dead 3 weeks when I arrived in Athens to clear out his place, and the June heat had turned the small ranch into a pressure cooker. I opened every window I could, but the air just sat there, thick and waiting. I'd driven 8 hours from Pittsburgh, and the last thing I wanted was to start sorting through decades of accumulated junk, so I did what I always do when I'm avoiding something. I took a walk. The property backed up to a stretch of woods that Raymond had always called the Old Tract, though I'd never learned what made it old or who had owned it before. The trees grew dense back there, their canopy so thick that even in broad daylight, the forest floor existed in permanent twilight. 20 yards in, the temperature dropped. Not gradually. It happened between one step and the next, like passing through an invisible membrane. My breath didn't fog, but I felt the cold settle into my joints, into the spaces between my ribs. The bird sounds that had followed me from the yard simply stopped. Not faded. Stopped. I found the well another 50 feet deeper into the woods, tucked into a natural depression where the ground dipped and the trees leaned inward like old men sharing secrets. It was maybe 4 feet across, built from stacked fieldstone that had gone green with age. Someone had tried to cap it with planks that had long since rotted away, leaving only the rusty nails jutting up like broken teeth. But what caught my attention, what made me stop and stare, was the water. The surface was perfectly still. Not calm, not placid, but still in a way that seemed almost deliberate, like glass that had been poured and left to harden. The reflection it held was sharp enough to read by. Every leaf, every branch, the patches of sky visible through the canopy. I could see myself looking down, my face pale and distorted by the slight curve of the water's surface. I picked up a piece of gravel from the crumbling mortar and tossed it in. The stone disappeared without a ripple, The water didn't move, but the reflection changed. In the space of a heartbeat, the sky and the water went from June afternoon blue to the deep purple black of midnight. Stars appeared, cold and distant, in places where there should have been leaves. My own reflection remained, but behind it, or beneath it, something else moved. A suggestion of movement. A shift in the darkness that might have been nothing at all. I stepped back from the well's edge, and the sound of my heel on dead leaves seemed too loud, too sharp. When I looked up, the real sky was still bright, still blue, still exactly what it should be at 3 in the afternoon. But my hands were shaking. Around the base of the well, I noticed things I'd missed in my initial approach. Rusted iron spikes driven into the ground at irregular intervals, maybe a dozen of them, all tilted inward as though they'd once held something down. Lengths of rotted rope, cut clean through, the ends frayed and dark with age. Someone had tried very hard to seal this place. Someone had failed, or given up, or both. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, the well, the spikes, the rope. More to ground myself in something ordinary than because I thought I'd need them. The camera clicked and whirred, and each sound felt like a small violation of the silence pressing in from all sides. Then I walked back to the house, and I didn't look behind me, even though every instinct I had screamed that I should. That night, Raymond's house began to speak. It started with the pipes. Old houses make noise. I knew that, accepted it, even found it comforting most of the time. But this wasn't the usual settling and creaking. This was a low vibration that started around 10, just as I was trying to fall asleep on Raymond's ancient couch. It came from deep in the walls, a thrumming that I felt in my teeth before I heard it with my ears. I got up and checked the water heater in the basement, the furnace, even the fuse box. But everything looked normal, dead, mostly. I'd turned off the main water valve earlier to prevent any burst pipes while the house sat empty. But the vibration continued, rising and falling in a rhythm that was almost, but not quite, regular. Almost, but not quite, like breathing. I went back upstairs and tried to ignore it. Failed. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep entirely and started going through Raymond's papers in the small office he'd set up in what used to be the dining room. Tax documents, utility bills, yellowing newspapers from the 50s. My uncle had never thrown anything away. I was sorting it all into piles for shredding when I found the folder. It was tucked into the back of the bottom drawer, wrapped in a plastic bag that had gone brittle with age. Inside were photocopies of what looked like county records, dated 1947. Someone, Raymond, I assumed, had highlighted certain passages in faded yellow marker. Property survey notes impediment in Tract 7, Section B. Local contractor refuses continued work. References ceiling. Conducted by previous owner. Status unknown. Recommend alternative access route. Board of Health inspection deferred pending resolution of disputed well closure. See attached correspondence with geological survey. Final notation. Work abandoned. Property restrictions maintained in perpetuity. Ceiling. The word appeared 3 times across different documents, always in quotation marks, always with the same bureaucratic unease bleeding through the formal language. Someone had wanted that well closed badly enough to involve multiple county agencies. Someone else had decided it was easier to just walk away. I was still reading when I heard the water running. The bathroom was at the end of the hall, door half open, light off. I hadn't been in there since using the toilet hours earlier. I definitely hadn't left the water on. I'd shut off the main valve, for God's sake. There shouldn't have been any water in the system at all, but I could hear it clearly. A steady stream hitting the porcelain basin, constant and purposeful. I walked down the hall slowly, my phone held out in front of me with the flashlight on. The beam caught the doorframe, the cracked tiles, the rust-stained sink. Water was indeed running from the faucet, though the handle was in the off position. The drain was plugged, and the basin was full of leaves. They were dark, almost black, their edges serrated like oak, but wrong somehow. Too regular, too perfect. They floated on the surface of the water, and scattered among them were small white objects that took me a long moment to recognize as candle stubs. The wax melted and reformed into uneven lumps. I reached out and turned the handle, though it was already off. The water stopped immediately. The leaves remained, gently settling as the surface stilled. I stood there for 5 minutes, maybe longer, staring at that impossible basin. Then I scooped the leaves and candle stubs into a trash bag, drained the sink, and went back to the office. I didn't sleep. I read every document in that folder 3 times, looking for something that would explain what I'd seen. I found nothing useful, only more questions and the growing certainty that Raymond had known something about that well, about whatever happened there in the 40s, and he'd chosen to stay silent. In the morning, I went back to the woods. I told myself I was being rational, that I needed to document the site properly, maybe get some measurements for the eventual property survey. I told myself I wasn't scared. I told myself a lot of things that weren't quite true. The temperature drop happened in the same spot between the same 2 trees. The silence fell like a curtain, and when I reached the well, I saw the footprints. They circled the stone rim in a perfect loop, pressed deep into the soft earth where the ground stayed perpetually damp. Boot prints, large, with a distinctive tread pattern that was recent enough that I could see the individual lugs clearly defined. Someone had walked around this well, slowly and deliberately, while the ground was wet from recent rain. Someone had stood here, perhaps for a long time, and walked in circles. I hadn't noticed them the day before. I would have noticed them. I took my phone out and photographed everything. The prints, the well, the spikes, the rope. I shot from different angles, adjusting for the poor light, making sure I captured every detail. Through the viewfinder, everything looked ordinary. Eerie, certainly. Abandoned and strange, but ultimately explicable. Just an old well in old woods. Nothing more. Then I checked the photos. In every single image, standing just to my left and slightly behind, there was a man. Not clearly visible. The figure was dark, indistinct, as though standing in shadow that didn't exist in the actual clearing, but the shape was unmistakable. Tall, thin, with arms hanging at his sides and his head turned toward the well. In some shots he was closer. In some he was farther back, but in every photograph he was there, and his position relative to mine suggested he was matching my movements, circling when I circled, stepping when I stepped. I spun around, heart hammering. The clearing was empty. Nothing but trees and shadows and that suffocating silence. I looked back at my phone. In the most recent photo, the one I'd taken just seconds ago, the figure stood close enough that I should have been able to reach out and touch him, close enough that his breath should have been on my neck. I ran. Not walked quickly, not retreated with dignity. I ran like a child fleeing from nightmares, branches catching at my clothes, and my breath coming in ragged gasps that echoed too loudly in the dead air. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tree line into Raymond's overgrown backyard, and even then I kept moving until I was inside the house with the door locked and my back against the wall. The photos were still on my phone. I deleted them, one by one, but I could still see that dark figure every time I closed my eyes. Still feel the weight of his attention, patient and unwavering. I should have left Athens that afternoon, packed up Raymond's papers, called a junk removal service to deal with the rest, and driven back to Pittsburgh without looking back. That would have been the sane response, the rational choice. Instead, I stayed. I stayed because something in me had shifted, some fundamental axis of belief that couldn't simply snap back into place. I'd seen something that shouldn't exist, and walking away wouldn't make it not real. It would only mean I was running from it. And if I ran now, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what I'd missed, what I'd failed to understand. So I stayed. And I tried to research. The Athens County Library had archives going back to the town's founding, and I spent most of the next day there, pulling old newspapers and property records, looking for anything about Raymond's land or the well. What I found was fragmentary, frustrating, the kind of information that raises more questions than it answers. In 1946, a man named Ezra Whitlock had owned the property. The Historical Society had one photo of him, gaunt, severe, with eyes that seemed to follow the camera. He'd bought the land in 1928 and lived there alone until his death in late 1947. The obituary was brief, listing no surviving family and no cause of death. But in the month before he died, Whitlock had filed repeated complaints with the county, claiming someone was trespassing on his property at night. He'd demanded the sheriff investigate. He'd insisted something needed to be properly sealed before it spreads. His final complaint, filed 2 days before his death, was nearly illegible, the handwriting deteriorating into a frantic scrawl about mirrors and circles, and something he kept calling the other walk. After Whitlock's death, the property sat vacant for 3 years before Raymond bought it at auction in 1950. No one else had bid. I photocopied everything I could find and took it back to the house. The sun was setting by then, painting the walls in shades of orange and red that made every shadow seem to move. I laid the documents out on Raymond's desk and tried to make connections, to find patterns. But the more I stared at Whitlock's final complaint, the more the words seemed to writhe on the page. The other walk matches mine, step for step. He knows the path now. He's learned it from watching. The pipes began their vibration as the last light faded. I sat in the dark office, listening to that low, thrumming echo through the walls, and I understood suddenly why Raymond had never mentioned the well, never spoken about Whitlock or the history of this place. Some silences are protective. Some secrets are kept not out of malice but mercy. I checked the bathroom. The sink was full of leaves again, though the water valve was still closed and the faucet handle untouched. This time I left them there. On the third night I dreamed. At least I believed I was dreaming when it started. I was lying on Raymond's couch, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster to keep my mind occupied. Then I was standing, though I hadn't recalled the movement between lying down and being upright. Then I was at the back door, my hand on the knob, and the woods beyond were lit by moonlight that seemed too bright, too silver, too cold. I walked outside. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through my socks. The temperature drop happened, but this time it felt like being submerged, like drowning in cold air. And I kept walking, following a path I couldn't see but somehow knew, deeper into the trees, toward the well. It was waiting for me. The water's surface was perfectly still, as always, but now it glowed with a faint phosphorescence that had nothing to do with moonlight. I approached the stone rim and looked down. My reflection stared back, and standing behind it, rendered in perfect clarity, was the figure from my photographs. I could see him now with a detail that the camera had never captured. His face was my face, every feature identical down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood fall. But his expression was wrong, fixed in a rictus of concentration that made my skin crawl. He was watching me, not my reflection. Me, the actual me standing at the well's edge. And as I stood there, frozen, he began to move. His lips shaped words I couldn't hear. His hand reached up, fingers spread, pressing against the surface of the water from beneath. From beneath. The water began to ripple then, small concentric circles expanding outward from where his hand pushed upward. The reflection shattered into fragments. Night sky, trees, two faces that were the same face, divided and multiplied into infinity. I stumbled backward and my foot caught on one of the iron spikes. I went down hard, my shoulder hitting the ground, and the impact jolted me back into my body, back into awareness. I was lying in Raymond's backyard, 20 feet from the tree line, my socks soaked through and my shoulder screaming with pain. The woods were silent. The moon was hidden behind clouds. And clearly visible in the damp grass between the house and the forest were two sets of footprints walking side by side toward the trees. Mine, leading out, and someone else's, larger and deeper, leading back. I left Athens at dawn, before the sun had fully cleared the eastern hills. I threw my things into the car and drove away from Raymond's house without looking back, though every instinct screamed that I should check the rearview mirror, that I'd see something following if I just glanced up at the glass. I didn't look. I drove. But here's what I can't escape. What follows me now in every reflection, every window, every surface that holds my image. I'm not entirely certain I was the one who left. The drive back to Pittsburgh felt wrong. Too familiar, like I'd made it 1,000 times before instead of just once. My apartment, when I reached it, felt staged, arranged by someone who knew what my life looked like, but didn't quite understand how it felt. Everything was in its place. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But the angles were wrong, the distances subtly off, and sometimes, late at night when the building's pipes begin their low vibration, I catch movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow that matches mine too perfectly, that anticipates my movements by a fraction of a second. I turn and see nothing, but the mirror on the wall, the dark window, the surface of water in a glass, they all hold something just slightly different than they should. I tell myself it was stress, grief, the psychological weight of dealing with Raymond's death and the strangeness of that place. I tell myself the well was just a well, that the footprints were mine alone, doubled by some trick of light and shadow. I tell myself I'm still who I was before I walked into those woods. But last week I found leaves in my bathroom sink. Dark leaves with two perfect edges, and among them, small white candle stubs melted into irregular shapes. The faucet was off. The water valve to my apartment has been closed for months while they repair the building's main line, and in the mirror above the sink, if I look very carefully, if I catch the light just right, I can see him standing behind me, patient, waiting, wearing my face like a mask he's still learning to adjust. I don't know which side of the reflection I'm on anymore. I don't know if I ever left Athens at all, or if I'm still down there in the dark, pressing my hand against the water's surface, trying to push through into the world that used to be mine. I don't know if the thing I see in the mirror is him, or if I'm him, and the thing I see is the memory of who I used to be. All I know is this. Sometimes, when the pipes vibrate and the shadows move, I catch myself walking in circles around my apartment, measuring distances I don't remember learning, tracing a path that feels older than memory, and if I'm not careful, if I let my attention drift for just a moment, I find myself at the window, looking out, searching the street below for someone who walks the way I walk, who moves the way I move, searching for the other one, the one who got away. Story 3. The digital sign died its little death at 9:47 p.m., same as every night. I watched from spot 12 as the last digit flickered, strobed, and finally surrendered to darkness. The kindergarten's marquee now read, Bright Futures Academy, followed by a phone number ending in -66-, that empty space where the final digit should have been pulsing like a missing tooth. I'd reported it 3 times to the property manager. 3 times he'd assured me someone would fix it. That was 6 weeks ago. The parking lot stretched before me, a grid of yellow lines painted over asphalt that had seen better decades. Beyond it, the kindergarten squatted like a cheerful intruder, all primary colors and hand-painted murals of smiling suns. And beyond that, separated by nothing more than a chain-link fence and 40 feet of overgrown grass, the cemetery spread its acres of tilted headstones and twisted oaks. Harrisburg Memorial Gardens, established 1807. The oldest graves were barely readable now, their inscriptions worn smooth by 2 centuries of Pennsylvania weather. I'd taken this job because it was easy. Show up at 9, make rounds every hour, leave at 6. The pay was enough to cover rent and keep the creditors at a low simmer. No one bothered me. No one expected conversation. Just walk, observe, report. The kind of work that lets your mind go elsewhere while your body goes through motions. Except my mind kept coming back to 306. It started 3 weeks into the job. I'd been sitting in my car, window cracked, listening to talk radio drone about interest rates and infrastructure, when the motion sensor on the kindergarten's playground suddenly blazed to life. The whole backyard lit up like a stage. Swings, slides, that weird dome-shaped climbing thing kids scramble over. 11 seconds of harsh white light, then darkness. I'd grabbed my flashlight and walked the perimeter. Nothing. No cats, no raccoons, no wind strong enough to move the swings. The sensor was industrial grade, the kind that required actual mass to trigger. I checked the fence for gaps. Solid. I swept my light across the playground equipment, half expecting to find some local teenager thinking they were clever. Empty. The next night I checked my watch when it happened. 3:06 a.m. 11 seconds of light. The night after that, same thing. 3:06 exactly. 11 seconds. I started setting a timer. When 3:06 approached, I'd position myself with a clear view of the playground and the cemetery beyond. The light would come on, illuminating nothing but painted metal and rubber mulch, and I'd scan for movement, for shadows, for anything that might explain it. There was never anything, just light, and then darkness, and the certain knowledge that I'd see it again tomorrow. Tonight, the sensation started earlier than usual. That prickling awareness of being watched, of existing in someone else's peripheral vision. I'd felt it on and off for weeks, but tonight it pressed against my skin like static electricity. I shifted in my seat, adjusted the rearview mirror, scanned the empty lot. The kindergarten windows reflected streetlight. The cemetery was a wall of darkness beyond the fence. The sign's dead digit stared at me. -66 underscore. In certain lighting, if you squinted, that underscore could almost be a 6 laying down, 666. I'd thought about it more than I should have. Thought about the cemetery right there. Thought about the way the playground sensor only triggered in the dead hours. Thought about probability and coincidence and the human brain's tendency to find patterns in chaos. My phone buzzed. A text from the property manager. Everything quiet? I typed back, yeah. Sign still broken. 3 dots appeared, pulsed, disappeared. No response. At 2:50 a.m., I got out of the car to stretch. The November air bit through my jacket, carrying that mineral smell of approaching winter. My breath clouded. I walked the perimeter of the lot, boots scuffing on pavement, listening to the ambient hum of the distant highway and the closer silence of sleeping buildings. The cemetery fence ran along the eastern edge of the property. During the day, it looked almost quaint. Wrought iron, painted black, ornamental spikes along the top, a proper Victorian-era barrier between the living and the dead. At night, it became something else. A suggestion more than a boundary. I checked my watch. 2:58. Something in me made a decision before my conscious mind caught up. I walked toward the cemetery. The main gate was 50 feet north of where the kindergarten property ended. Heavy iron, the kind that should squeal like a wounded animal when opened. I'd never seen anyone go in or out at night. During my rounds, I'd pass it, note its locked status, move on. Tonight, as I approached, the gate swung open. No wind, no hand on the metal. It simply opened, smooth and silent, as if the hinges had been oiled an hour ago. The gap widened to about 3 feet and stopped. I stood there, flashlight in hand, but not raised, trying to decide if I'd actually seen what I thought I'd seen. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. The latch had been faulty. A slight settling of the frame had released it. There was wind I hadn't noticed. The other part, the part that had been counting down to 3:06 for weeks, said nothing. It just watched. Then the solar lights began. The cemetery had them lining the main path, small fixtures meant to mark the way for day visitors who stayed too late. They charged during the day and glowed dimly after sunset, usually dying out by midnight. I'd never seen them this bright. The first one nearest the gate flared to life, brilliant white. Then the next one, 10 feet further in. Then the next. One by one, in perfect sequence, like runway lights guiding something toward me or away from me or simply marking a path that something was walking. I counted them. 11 lights, flaring and dimming in sequence, illuminating cracked pavement and weather-worn headstones and the shadows of bare trees. The last one was deep in the cemetery, maybe 200 feet from where I stood. Then they all went dark. I checked my watch without thinking. 3:06. Behind me, the kindergarten playground lights blazed on. I turned and saw nothing but empty equipment casting sharp shadows. 11 seconds, I thought. I counted them in my head, trying to match my internal timer to whatever mechanism was triggering this. When I reached 11, the lights died. I was standing in darkness between an open cemetery gate and a fenced playground, feeling my heartbeat in my throat, trying to remember when fear had become my primary emotion at this job. The gate was still open. I went back to my car, locked the doors, and watched the sign's dead digit until my shift ended. The Polaroid was waiting on my hood when I arrived the next night. I almost missed it. The windshield was covered in a thin film of frost, and I'd started the engine to let it warm up before heading to my spot. But something white against the dark paint caught my eye, and I walked around to find it. A photograph, the kind that develops as you watch, though this one was already fixed. The image showed the kindergarten sign, perfectly in focus, the phone number reading 7175550666, all digits present, including the one that had been dead for weeks. And behind the sign, blurred but unmistakable, a human silhouette. Me, except I'd never stood there. Never stood on that side of the sign. My rounds took me past it, sure, but always from the parking lot side, never from the building side where this photo had been taken. I turned the Polaroid over, nothing on the back. The image was crisp despite the low light, suggesting either a flash or a long exposure. Either way, someone had been close enough to photograph me without my knowledge. I looked around the parking lot. Empty. The street beyond was quiet. Thursday night in this part of Harrisburg meant early beds and locked doors. The kindergarten's windows were dark. The cemetery was its usual wall of shadows. I held the photo by its edges and took it into my car, placing it on the dashboard where I could see it. The silhouette stared back, frozen in a moment I couldn't remember living. The night proceeded normally until 3:06. This time, I was ready. I had my phone out, camera app open, pointed at the playground. When the lights blazed on, I started recording. 11 seconds of empty swings and motionless slides, the footage perfectly steady, showing absolutely nothing that would explain the sensor's trigger. When the lights died, I reviewed the video. My breath caught. At the 7-second mark, something moved at the edge of the frame. Not in the playground itself, but beyond it, at the fence line where the cemetery began. A shape, darker than the surrounding darkness, that seemed to shift position between one frame and the next. I played it again. There, a suggestion of movement, like watching something through deep water. I played it a third time and the shape was gone. The same timestamp, the same frames, but whatever thought I'd seen, wasn't there anymore. I checked the file properties. Not corrupted, not edited, just a video of an empty playground that had briefly contained something it no longer did. I didn't sleep that day. The pattern changed on the 5th night after the photograph. The sign's dead digit didn't just stay dark, it pulsed. Slow at first, a gentle flicker I might have missed if I hadn't been staring at it. Then, more pronounced. On, off, rhythmic, familiar. I realized what it matched when my chest started tightening. The pulse was synchronized with my breathing. When I inhaled, the digit brightened. When I exhaled, it dimmed. I tested it, deliberately slowing my breath, and watched the flickering slow to match. I held my breath entirely, and the digit went dark. When I gasped for air, it blazed. I got out of the car and walked away from the sign, circling to the far side of the parking lot. The distance didn't matter. The digit still pulsed with my breathing, visible across 100 feet of asphalt and air. I tried to rationalize it. Some kind of sensor picking up carbon dioxide levels. A bizarre coincidence. A malfunction that happened to create a pattern my pattern-seeking brain latched onto. But sensors don't work that way, and malfunctions don't synchronize with biological rhythms. At 3:06, the playground lights came on, and I saw someone standing by the swings. Not someone. Something. A shape that held the approximate form of a human but moved wrong, like footage played at slightly the wrong speed. It stood motionless while the lights blazed, a dark figure against the bright playground, and even from my position across the parking lot, I felt it looking at me. 11 seconds passed. The lights died. I ran to the fence, flashlight up, beam cutting through darkness. The playground was empty. The swings hung still, I swept the light across every piece of equipment, every corner, every shadow. Nothing. But the gate to the cemetery was open again. This time, all 11 solar lights were burning at once, illuminating a path that led from the gate to a mausoleum near the cemetery's center. Old stone, ivy-covered, the kind of structure that spoke of money and the desire to be remembered even in death. I stood at the fence line, separated from the cemetery by chain link, and a decision I knew I'd regret either way. The lights burned steady, waiting. My phone rang. The property manager. At 3:07 a.m., I answered. "Are you there?" His voice was tight. "Yeah." "The cameras are showing something I need you to check." We didn't have cameras. I'd asked about them during training. Budget cuts, I'd been told. "What cameras?" A pause. "The ones you're standing in front of." I looked up. There, mounted on a pole I'd passed 100 times, a camera housing I'd never noticed. Red light blinking. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "That's what I need you to tell me. The feed is showing 2 of you." My skin went cold. "2 of what?" "2 of you. One standing where you are now. One by the swings. You're both moving the same way." I lowered the phone, turned slowly to face the playground. Empty. Just equipment and shadows. "There's nothing here," I said. "It's right there on my screen." "You're looking at yourself." I ended the call. The sign's dead digit pulsed faster now, matching my accelerating heartbeat. The cemetery lights still burned. The gate stood open. I thought about the Polaroid, about the silhouette that was me but couldn't have been me, about the shape in the video that appeared and disappeared between viewings, about the certainty that something had been watching me for weeks, learning my rhythms, matching my patterns, waiting for the moment when I'd stop being an observer and become something else. The property manager called back. I didn't answer. At 3:08, my car horn started blaring. Short bursts. 3 long, 3 short, 3 long. SOS in Morse code. But I had the keys in my pocket and the car was locked. The horn stopped. The sign went dark completely. Not just the dead digit, but the entire display. Then it came back, blazing bright. Every LED at maximum intensity. 71755506666. It read, complete, fixed, all digits present. And below the number, where there should have been nothing but the school's tagline, new text scrolled across. Spot 12, always watching, always breathing. I backed away from the sign, from the car, from everything. My breath came fast and shallow, and I watched the dead digit pulse in perfect synchrony, faster and faster, matching my panic. The cemetery lights began to strobe. On, off, all 11 at once. The playground lights joined them. The car's headlights flashed to life, adding to the chaos of illumination and darkness. And through it all, I saw them, figures in the cemetery, dark shapes moving between headstones, figures on the playground standing by swings that didn't move, figures in my car's windows, sitting in seats I knew were empty, all of them with my silhouette, all of them watching me with my own eyes. The property manager's voice came from my phone, from my car's speakers, from the kindergarten's PA system I didn't know could turn on. "Which one are you? Which one is real?" I didn't know. I still don't know. I'm writing this from spot 12. The sign's digit pulses with my breath. The cemetery gate stands open. The solar lights burn steady, marking a path I haven't walked but know I will. In 3 minutes, it will be 3:06 a.m. The playground lights will come on. I'll see myself standing there, or standing here, or standing somewhere between the two. The property manager keeps calling. The cameras see things I don't, or I see things the cameras don't, or we both see different versions of the same truth. The Polaroid is still on my dashboard. I've taken others now, trying to prove to myself that I'm here, that I'm real, that the silhouette in each photo is actually me, but each one shows something slightly different. A figure that's me, but not quite. Standing where I stood, but at an angle I couldn't have stood at. Looking at the camera with eyes that reflect light in ways that human eyes shouldn't. My watch reads 3:04. The sign pulses faster. I can feel myself breathing, but I'm not sure if it's my breath making the light pulse or the light pulsing making me breathe. Cause and effect have become suggestions rather than laws. The cemetery figures are closer now. I can see them without looking, feel their presence like pressure against my skull. They're patient. They've been patient for weeks, for months, for however long it takes for a security guard to stop questioning what he sees and start accepting it. 3:05. The gate is open, the path is lit. The mausoleum waits. I think about leaving. Just getting in my car and driving away, finding a different job, a different city, a different life where signs stay fixed and sensors have rational explanations, and the only person with my face is me. But I know I won't, because some part of me understands that leaving wouldn't matter. Whatever this is, whatever has been watching and waiting and breathing in sync with me, it isn't tied to this place. It's tied to me, or I'm tied to it, or we were never separate to begin with. 3:06. The lights come on. I stand and watch myself standing on the playground, at the cemetery gate, in my car, at spot 12. All of me, and none of me, and something that wears my shape like a photograph slowly developing. The sign blazes, 666, and I realize, with a clarity that feels like drowning, that I've been completing the number all along, not waiting for it to be fixed, not watching it malfunction, becoming it. The dead digit pulses one more time, matching a breath I'm no longer sure is mine. Then everything goes dark, and in the darkness I hear my own voice asking the question I've been avoiding. Which side of the fence are you really on? I don't answer. I don't know if I can. Story 4. The neon vacancy sign of the Cactus Motor Lodge flickered against my dorm window 3 blocks away, its rhythm matching the pulse behind my temples. I'd been watching it for 40 minutes, telling myself I was studying behavioral patterns for my psych thesis, but really just avoiding sleep. Sleep meant dreaming about the man in the orthopedic boot, and I'd had enough of that particular feature presentation. It started 3 nights ago outside Rosie's Tap House on Mill Avenue. I'd finished my shift bartending, Thursday night, slow crowd, home by midnight. The desert air had that particular quality it gets in late September, still holding the day's heat, but with an edge that promised October. I was thumbing through my rideshare app when he materialized beside me, close enough that I caught the smell of him. Stale cigarettes and something medicinal, like the antiseptic they use in urgent care clinics. The boot was elaborate, medical grade, one of those tall ones that immobilizes everything from toes to mid-calf, with Velcro straps and a rocker bottom. He leaned heavily on a metal crutch, his face obscured by the bill of a Diamondback's cap pulled low. He said he lived just around the corner, half a block at most. His car had died, his phone was dead, his girlfriend worked nights. The story spilled out in fragments, practiced but not smooth, like a scene that had been rehearsed but never quite perfected. He gestured vaguely toward the alley that ran behind the old hardware store, the one everyone called Dead Street because the city gave up on the streetlights years ago. Something in my gut clenched. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at my phone, or how his weight shifted despite the supposed injury. Maybe it was the fact that I'd lived in Tempe for 3 years, and knew for certain that alley dead-ended at a chain-link fence behind the abandoned mattress warehouse. I told him I couldn't help. His jaw tightened, visible even in shadow. He asked again, this time adding that his medication was at home, that he needed it soon. The urgency in his voice felt manufactured, like he was reading from a script he didn't quite believe in. That's when I noticed my phone. The rideshare app had gone strange, multiple location markers appearing in rapid succession, all pinging the same coordinates somewhere in that black stretch of alley. Not scattered across the map like drivers passing by, but stacked on top of each other, pulsing in the same spot like a heartbeat, like something was being rehearsed there, over and over. I killed the app and started walking toward the 7-Eleven on University, keeping to the well-lit sidewalks. In the reflection of the storefront windows, I watched him. He stood there for maybe 15 seconds, perfectly still. Then the crutch came up, hooked neatly under his arm, and he walked, both feet flat on the pavement, zero limp, toward a dark sedan parked with its lights off. He pulled out his phone, illuminated his face with the screen's glow, and held up his fingers. 1, 2, 3, counting something, timing something. The sedan's engine started without headlights. I walked the long way back to campus, staying on Veterans Way where the university keeps the lights bright and the emergency call boxes frequent. My roommate Devin was still up, gaming with his headset on, and I was grateful for the noise, the normalcy. I didn't tell him what happened. How do you explain that feeling? That you'd accidentally stumbled into someone else's rehearsal, glimpsed the blocking and staging for something that hadn't happened yet? The next morning, Friday, I tried to dismiss it. Tempe has homeless population, people asking for help, all kinds of street performers practicing their craft. I'd probably misread the whole thing. The boot could be real. The sedan could belong to anyone. The fingers could mean anything. But Friday night, I saw him again. Same corner, same block. Different costume this time. Athletic gear, expensive running shoes. One ankle wrapped in what looked like a fresh ACE bandage. He was demonstrating a limp to two other men, showing them how to make it look authentic, how to create asymmetry in your gait, how to make people feel sorry enough to stop, to help, to roll down a window. I watched from inside the coffee shop across the street, my heart doing something arrhythmic in my chest. They practiced for 20 minutes. He'd limp toward an imaginary car, then reset, walk back normally, adjust the bandage, try again. The other men took notes on their phones. At one point, he pointed directly at the 7-Eleven where I'd gone that first night, tracing a path with his finger, demonstrating something. When I left through the back exit, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Saturday, I stayed in, told Devin I had a migraine, which wasn't entirely untrue. The pressure behind my eyes had become constant, and I'd developed this habit of checking the locks every 30 minutes. Devin asked if I was okay, and I said something about midterms. He accepted it because that's what you do with roommates. You accept the surface explanation and don't dig. But I couldn't stop thinking about the choreography, the counting, the way the whole thing had the feeling of a production being refined, polished. And if it was a rehearsal, what was the actual performance? What happens when the blocking is finalized and they're ready to debut? Sunday morning, I found it. The first piece of tape. Clear medical tape, the kind used to secure gauze bandages, pressed onto my car's door handle. Just a small strip, maybe an inch long, positioned where your fingers naturally grip. I peeled it off, examined it in the parking lot's harsh sunlight. There was no residue on the adhesive side, fresh, unused. Like someone was testing its placement, checking to see if I'd notice. I found another piece Sunday evening, driver's side again, slightly different position, lower, near the lock mechanism. Monday morning, 2 pieces, both on the passenger side. Each time, fresh tape. Each time, unmarked. Each time, positioned like someone was mapping the best locations for something. I started wearing gloves to remove them, keeping them in a Ziploc bag I stored in my desk drawer. Evidence of what? I couldn't say. Evidence for whom? I had no idea. Tuesday, Devin noticed me checking the locks for the 3rd time in an hour. "You're being weird," he said, not unkindly. Like, weirder than usual weird. I wanted to tell him, wanted to dump the whole thing out. The boot man, the sedan, the tape, the growing certainty that I was being studied, measured, prepped for something. But the words felt insane even in my head. What would I say? Someone's practicing asking me for help? Someone's leaving unused tape on my car? Call the police with what? There's no threat, no actual crime, just this mounting sense of choreography swirling around me. Just stressed, I told him. Thesis stuff. He nodded, went back to his screen, and I felt the loneliness of it then. The isolation that comes when you can't make anyone understand that the normal world has developed seams, and you're seeing what moves underneath. Wednesday afternoon, I skipped my behavioral psych seminar and drove past Rosie's Tap House. The alley behind the hardware store had activity. 3 vehicles parked at angles: the sedan, a white panel van, and a motorcycle. 4 men standing in a loose circle, and yes, there he was. Bootman, now bootless, gesturing with both hands, demonstrating something with his phone. One of the others had a notebook, sketching what looked like diagrams. Routes, maybe. Timing sequences. I didn't stop. Didn't slow down enough to be obvious. But in my rearview mirror, I saw one of them lift his phone, saw the flash of a camera shutter capturing something. That night, the tape escalated. 6 pieces now, arranged in a pattern I couldn't decipher. 2 on the door handle, 1 on the side mirror, 3 on the rear passenger door. Like someone was building a map of points, a constellation that would eventually reveal its shape. I left them there, stopped removing them, let them accumulate. Devin asked if I was planning to detail my car, said it looked like I'd been in an accident with the medical tape and all. I told him I'd spilled something sticky, was trying to keep the handles clean. He gave me that look people give you when they're deciding whether to push or retreat, then retreated. Thursday, last night, I found the note. Not on my car this time. Slipped under my dorm room door, folded once, my name printed on the outside in neat block letters. Inside, a single sentence: "We appreciate your patience during the rehearsal process." No signature, no explanation, just that. A thank you note from the void. I sat on my bed, note in hand, and tried to inventory what I knew. A man with a fake injury, a practiced routine, location markers clustered in an alley, tape measuring my movements. A note acknowledging that something has been rehearsing around me, with me, because of me. And then the question that's been building like pressure in my skull. What am I patient for? What performance am I waiting to see? Devin's gone for the weekend, visiting family in Phoenix. The dorm is quieter without his gaming noise, his casual conversation, his sanity-affirming presence. I've been sitting here since he left, watching that vacancy sign pulse, thinking about rehearsals and performances and the distance between them. An hour ago, my phone started pinging. Not notifications, something else. The screen lights up every few minutes with a flash of the rideshare app, even though I deleted it 3 days ago. Each time it appears, it shows the same thing. A map with a single marker, right here, at my location. My exact location. And each time, a countdown timer appears briefly. 10:47, 10:46, 10:45. I checked my car 15 minutes ago. The tape is gone. All of it removed, every piece, leaving only the ghost of residue where they'd been. In their place, something new. A small orange cone placed carefully behind my rear tire, the kind they use to block off parking spots, to keep something reserved. The vacancy sign across the street just went dark. First time in the 3 years I've lived here. The manager's truck is still in the lot, lights on in the office, but that sign, the reliable, constant red pulse, has gone black. My door lock just clicked. Not the sound of someone trying to get in, the sound of it unlocking, from the inside. I haven't moved from my desk, haven't touched it, but I heard it clearly. The bolt retracting, metal sliding against metal, the tiny mechanical sigh of a lock releasing. The hallway outside is silent. No footsteps, no voices. Just that particular quality of silence that feels occupied. Like the pause before someone speaks their line. My phone is counting down, 0003, 0002, 0001. I understand now. I'm not the audience for this performance. I never was. I'm the stage, and the rehearsal is finally over. Story 5. The breathing started at 3:47 a.m. I know because I've been staring at my phone for the past hour, watching the screen illuminate with each new call from numbers I didn't recognize. This one came from a 720 area code, local to Boulder, though I'd never been there in person. I let it ring once, twice, then swiped to answer without speaking. 4 breaths, measured, deliberate. A pause that stretched like pulled taffy. Then 4 more. I recognized the pattern immediately. It was the same cadence from the videos, the ones that had first felt like sanctuary and now felt like surveillance. It had started innocuously enough 3 months earlier, the way most terrible things do. I'd been browsing a meditation forum at 2 a.m., unable to sleep through another night of grad school anxiety, when I stumbled across a post about conscious breathwork. The user, going by the handle Lotus Path Maya, described techniques that went beyond the standard box breathing I'd tried before. She talked about accessing deeper states of awareness, about communities that practiced together across distances, about transformation that felt cellular. I messaged her. She responded within minutes despite the late hour. The first video call felt like meeting an old friend. She had this way of tilting her head when she listened, as if she could hear not just your words, but the frequencies beneath them. Her background was always the same: a wall draped in cream-colored fabric, a small altar with candles whose flames never seemed to flicker despite what must have been air currents in the room. She never showed much of herself, just her face, framed by dark hair that fell in a way that obscured her periphery. She invited me to join a circle. Sacred breath, she called it. A practice reserved for those ready to release their attachments to the material plane. The first few sessions were held over video conference, a dozen of us scattered across time zones, breathing in unison while a man named Elias guided us through the counts. 4 breaths in, hold. 4 breaths out, hold. Repeat until the boundaries between self and space began to blur. I'd emerged from these sessions feeling hollowed out in the best way, like I'd been excavated of some ancient sediment I'd been carrying without knowing. Elias started appearing in my individual calls with her. He'd sit just outside the frame, a shadow that occasionally moved, and offer what he called guidance. Small things at first. Suggestions about simplifying my environment to reduce psychic clutter, recommendations to limit my exposure to people who might drain my energy field. Gentle encouragement to see my academic work as just another form of ego attachment. When he suggested I delete my social media profiles as an exercise in ego death, it felt radical but right. I was tired of performing my life for an invisible audience anyway. When he mentioned selling some of my belongings to understand the lightness of non-possession, I compiled a list of items I'd been meaning to donate. When he proposed a silent retreat, 10 days in a cabin outside Taos, no communication with anyone, just me and the practice, I felt something in my chest loosen with possibility. But then came the stipulation that made my throat tighten. I shouldn't tell anyone where I was going. The purification process required complete severance, he explained. If people knew where I was, their thoughts would follow me there, contaminating the space with their concern and judgment. I'd been sitting at my desk when he said this, and I remember looking around my apartment as if seeing it through someone else's eyes. The thought crossed my mind that this was how it happened, how people disappeared into things they couldn't explain to the people who loved them. But I dismissed it. I was a graduate student in cognitive science, for God's sake. I knew how to assess risk and manipulate variables. This was just breath work. I told Elias I needed time to think about it. That's when I met him. The message came through an app I'd only recently downloaded at their suggestion. Something encrypted, something that auto-deleted messages after 24 hours. The profile showed no photo, just a name, G. The message was brief and friendly. He said he was another member of the circle, that he'd also been working with Elias, that he understood how overwhelming the practice could feel at first. He said he lived in Boulder, and offered to show me around if I ever visited. Maybe drive me to some of the spots where the veil between worlds felt thinner. I found his casualness comforting. Unlike Elias's formal intensity, or her studied mysticism, this person texted like a normal guy. Mentions of coffee shops and hiking trails, complaints about winter parking, recommendations for a Thai place near campus. When he offered to drive me to a cabin in the mountains for a weekend practice intensive, something he called a bridge between solo retreats and group work, I almost said yes. I'd been feeling isolated, disconnected from my cohort, uncertain about my research direction. The idea of going somewhere quiet with someone who understood the practice felt like exactly what I needed. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he kept mentioning how remote the location was, how good the isolation would be for deepening the work. Maybe it was the realization that I'd never actually seen his face, never heard his voice. Maybe it was just instinct, that ancient alarm system that predates logic. I told him I appreciated the offer, but I wasn't ready. His response came 3 minutes later. A photo. It showed the front of my building, not a street view pulled from Google Maps, but a recent photo taken from across the street. The angle suggested someone standing near the coffee shop where I got my morning espresso. The timestamp indicated it had been taken that morning, around the time I usually left for campus. Before I could process what I was seeing, another photo arrived. This one showed my electric meter through my ground floor window, the digital display clearly visible. The consumption reading was 0. He knew I wasn't home. My hands started shaking badly enough that I nearly dropped my phone. I was at the library, sitting in my usual carrel on the 3rd floor, surrounded by the ambient noise of academic life. Keyboard clicks, chair squeaks, the whisper of turning pages. The normalcy of it suddenly felt obscene. I grabbed my laptop and bag and left, moving quickly enough that the student at the next carrel looked up in concern. I didn't go home. Instead, I went directly to campus police. The officer who took my report was younger than I expected, with the kind of earnest efficiency that suggested this was among his first assignments. He typed everything I said into a computer that seemed older than both of us, asking clarifying questions about usernames and apps and whether I'd ever given out my address. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But he still wrote it down with the gentle skepticism of someone who'd heard many versions of, but I never told them before. He was in the middle of asking whether I'd noticed anyone following me in physical space when my phone started vibrating on the desk between us. Video call from an unknown number. I let it ring through to voicemail. It immediately called again. The officer gestured that I should answer it, that he'd be right here as a witness to whatever happened. My finger hovered over the decline button, but then I thought about needing evidence, about how everything in my story so far sounded like it could be paranoia or coincidence. I accepted the call. The screen filled with low-resolution video of a floor. Not a fancy hardwood or distinctive tile, just the kind of generic beige carpet that could be in a million apartments or hotel rooms. The angle suggested the phone was propped up or lying down, the camera facing across the room rather than up at a face. Then I saw the shoes. Men's sneakers, New Balance, worn, the kind that suggested daily use rather than athletic performance. They moved into frame from the left, pacing slowly, deliberately, just close enough that I could see the frayed hem of jeans above them. A voice came through the speaker, but it wasn't speaking to me. It was her voice, saying something I couldn't quite make out. The words muffled as if she were talking to someone else in the room. The shoes stopped moving. There was a sound like furniture scraping. Then 4 breaths, audible, deliberate. The exhalation forceful enough to distort the phone's microphone. Pause. 4 more breaths. The officer was leaning forward now, watching the screen with me. He started to say something, but the call ended abruptly, the screen reverting to my lock screen photo, a picture I'd taken on a hiking trail last fall, back when things felt simpler. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked if I recognized the voice or the location. I told him about her, about the meditation circle, about how that breathing pattern was part of the practice. Even as I said it, I could hear how it sounded. Breathing exercises weren't a crime. Weird phone calls weren't legally actionable. Photos of building exteriors taken from public sidewalks weren't technically threats. But he wrote it all down anyway. He gave me a case number and his direct extension, and told me to call immediately if anything else happened. He also suggested I might want to stay somewhere else for a few days, just as a precaution. Maybe with friends. Maybe somewhere these people couldn't find me. I wanted to ask him how I was supposed to know where they couldn't find me, since I still didn't understand how they'd found me in the first place. But I just nodded and thanked him, and walked out into the late afternoon light that felt too bright and too normal for what I'd just experienced. That night, I stayed at a motel near the highway, the kind of place with exterior doors and parking spaces directly in front of each room. I paid cash, used a fake name, and kept my phone turned off. I lay on top of the comforter. I couldn't bring myself to get under it, and stared at the popcorn ceiling. trying to reconstruct how this had happened. I'd been careful. I'd used the encrypted app, never shared personal information, kept my last name and university affiliation private. But information has a way of leaking, doesn't it? Metadata and photos, IP addresses, the digital breadcrumbs we scatter without realizing we're leaving a trail for anyone patient enough to follow. At some point I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. I'd turned it back on out of some stubborn refusal to be completely unreachable, and now I was regretting it. The screen showed 3:47 a.m. and an unfamiliar number with a 213 area code. I didn't answer. It rang through to voicemail. Immediately another call came, this one from a 505 number, then a 303, then a 617. I started declining them, but they kept coming. Different numbers, relentless. Finally, I answered one. 4 breaths. Pause. 4 breaths. Then silence. But not the silence of an ended call. The silence of someone listening, waiting to hear if I'd speak first. I hung up. The calls continued through the night. Different numbers each time, always the same pattern of breathing. By dawn, I'd stopped answering, but I couldn't stop counting the calls. 23 total. All different numbers, all the same message. When I returned to my apartment the next day, everything appeared untouched. No broken locks, no rearranged belongings, no obvious signs of entry. But there were small things that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The coffee cup I'd left in the sink was turned slightly, the handle facing a different direction. The blinds in my bedroom were raised an inch higher than I usually kept them. The thermostat was set to 68 instead of 66. Or maybe I was imagining it. Maybe this was what paranoia felt like. The slow dissolution of certainty, the creeping suspicion that every detail was evidence of something sinister. I called the officer from campus police. He said he'd file an updated report, but that there wasn't much they could do about phone calls from different numbers, unless there were explicit threats. He suggested I change my number, maybe get a restraint order if I could identify who I was restraining. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I had usernames and encrypted handles, and a first name that was probably fake. I had video footage of a carpeted floor and men's shoes. I had breathing patterns that matched a meditation technique taught in a dozen YouTube videos. Nothing tangible, nothing actionable. Just a mounting sense that I'd been incorporated into something I didn't understand and couldn't escape. That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding. I went back through my message history with her and with him, looking for details I might have missed. Timestamps, location tags, anything that might help me understand who they actually were. That's when I noticed something strange. The timestamps on her messages were inconsistent with a Boulder location. When she'd messaged me at what I assumed was 10 p.m. her time, the metadata showed it as 12 a.m. Eastern. When she'd sent a morning message about watching the sunrise, it was timestamped at a time that would have still been dark in Colorado. I pulled up the video call history. Each session had been scheduled at times that seemed convenient for Mountain Time, but inconvenient for almost any other zone. Early mornings or late nights, the liminal hours when most people are either asleep or just waking. But if she wasn't actually in Boulder, if she was somewhere east, then these times would have been mid-morning or mid-afternoon. Normal business hours. The kind of times when you might be making multiple calls as part of a routine workday. My stomach turned as the implication settled. This wasn't a spiritual community. This was something else, something organized, something that had identified me as a target based on what? My vulnerability, my isolation, my demonstrated willingness to trust strangers who spoke the language of transformation. I started searching. Meditation scams, spiritual group fraud, catfishing through wellness communities. The search results were both validating and terrifying. Story after story of people who'd joined online groups, been slowly separated from their support networks, been convinced to make financial contributions or travel to remote locations. Most of them eventually realized what was happening and pulled away. Some didn't. But none of the stories included what was happening to me now. This persistent, methodical contact after I'd already refused. Most scammers moved on when a mark proved uncooperative. Why were they still calling? What did they want? The breathing calls continued, every night at 3:47 a.m., sometimes multiple times throughout the early morning hours. I stopped sleeping, started existing in a perpetual state of exhaustion that made everything feel slightly unreal, like I was watching my life through frosted glass. I moved again, this time to a friend's apartment across town. I didn't tell him why, just said I was having issues with my building's heating system. The calls found me there too. Same time, same pattern. I changed my number. The calls continued on the new one within 36 hours. I threw my phone in a drawer and bought a burner with cash from a gas station. That one stayed silent for almost a week. Then at 3:47 a.m. on the 8th day, it rang. I stared at it, this device that no one should have the number for, vibrating on my friend's coffee table like an accusation. I'd been so careful. I'd only given the number to my advisor, my parents, the campus police officer. Had they hacked into one of those accounts? Were they just systematically calling every number in the area code? Or was there another explanation? One that my rational mind kept rejecting, but that felt more plausible with each passing sleepless night. What if the practice had worked? What if I'd actually opened something during those breathing sessions? Some frequency or channel that they could now tune into regardless of physical distance or technological barriers? I know how that sounds. I know the difference between magical thinking and material reality. But in those suspended hours before dawn, with a phone that shouldn't be ringing displaying an unknown number that shouldn't exist, the boundary between the two felt negotiable. Last week, I finally did what I'd been resisting. I watched the video call again, the one that had interrupted my police report. I'd screen recorded it instinctively, some part of me knowing I'd need to see it again, even as another part of me wanted to delete all evidence of any of this. I watched it frame by frame this time, adjusting the brightness and contrast on my laptop. The shoes moved through the scene, pacing. But in one frame, just for a second, the angle shifted slightly, as if whoever was filming had adjusted the phone's position. And in that brief moment, I caught a reflection in what I now realized was a mirror on the far wall. It showed a room, not the carefully curated backdrop from her usual calls, but a generic space that could have been anywhere. And in that space, multiple figures. I couldn't make out faces or details, but I could see the suggestion of several people, all standing in a loose circle, all facing the camera, all breathing in unison. I've stopped trying to figure out what they want. I've stopped researching scams and reading articles about catfishing schemes. Those explanations require logic, motivation, a chain of cause and effect that leads somewhere comprehensible. This doesn't feel comprehensible anymore. The calls still come. Every night at 3:47 a.m., 4 breaths. Pause, 4 breaths. Sometimes from numbers with area codes I recognize. Sometimes from international numbers. Once, memorably, from my own number. My original one. The one I'd abandoned weeks ago. I've developed a strange relationship with them now. I don't answer, but I don't silence my phone either. I lie awake, counting the seconds between the breaths, trying to hear if there's anything beneath the breathing. Whispers, background noise, anything that might tell me where they are, or who they are, or what they think they're doing. Sometimes I catch myself breathing along with them. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. The rhythm that once felt like meditation now feels like synchronization, like I'm being tuned to a frequency I can't escape. My advisor suggested I take a leave of absence. She said I seemed distracted, anxious, that my recent work lacked its usual rigor. She didn't say I seemed crazy, but I could see her thinking it. I could see her wondering if the pressure of the program had finally broken something fundamental. Maybe it has. Maybe none of this is real. Maybe I've constructed an elaborate delusion to explain garden variety stress and loneliness, projected it onto some random people in an online meditation forum who were probably just as lost as I was. But then my phone rings at 3:47 a.m., and I know, or I think I know, that something found me in those video calls. Something reached through the screen during those breathing sessions, when I was supposed to be releasing my boundaries and opening to higher consciousness. Maybe I opened too far. Maybe I let something in that I won't be able to get out. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me awake more than anything, Maybe I'm still in the practice. Maybe I never left. Maybe everything since that first video call has been part of the technique. A carefully orchestrated dissolution of self that I mistook for my actual life. The phone is ringing now. 3:47 a.m., right on schedule. A number I don't recognize from an area code I've never seen. I could answer it. I could finally speak, ask them what they want, demand they explain what this has all been for. But I already know what I'll hear. 4 breaths, measured and deliberate. A pause that contains everything and nothing. 4 more breaths, like a call and response across a distance that might be physical or might be something else entirely. And underneath it all, so faint I might be imagining it, the sound of others breathing too. A chorus of inhalations and exhalations, all perfectly synchronized, all following the same pattern we learned in those early sessions. All of us still practicing, all of us still counting, all of us waiting for something we can't name to arrive in the space between breaths. The phone is still ringing. My finger hovers over the answer button. Outside my window, the sky is that particular shade of pre-dawn gray that makes everything look temporary, like the world hasn't decided yet if it's going to resolve into something solid or remain forever suspended in this uncertain state. I think I understand now what they meant about ego death, about releasing attachments, about the boundaries between self and space dissolving. I think I finally understand the practice. 4 breaths in, hold. 4 breaths out, hold. The phone stops ringing, but the breathing continues. Mine, or theirs, or some merged frequency that no longer needs a technological intermediary to connect us. In the mirror across from my bed, I can see my own reflection. But there's something wrong with the angle, something that suggests a perspective that isn't quite mine, as if someone else is also looking through my eyes, watching me watch myself, breathing in the same rhythm, waiting to see what I'll do next. I close my eyes. I count to 4. I breathe. And somewhere, in Boulder or beyond it, in the physical world, or in whatever space the practice actually opened, they breathe with me, and we are all still learning the same lesson. The phone begins to ring again. Story 6. The call came in at 1:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Filth flies in a rental near Manito Park. Routine work for a pest control tech in Spokane. I'd been doing this for 8 years, long enough that the disgust had worn down to a dull professional detachment. Maggots and forgotten trash, roaches behind refrigerators, the occasional dead rat liquefying in a wall cavity. You learn to breathe through your mouth and think about your next paycheck. The house was a narrow craftsman painted the color of old teeth, tucked between 2 renovated properties that made it look even more decrepit by comparison. The lawn had that particular shade of late summer brown that comes from genuine neglect rather than drought restrictions. I parked my van at the curb and checked my watch. 1:53 p.m. She answered on the 3rd knock, a woman in her mid-50s with gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She wore a lavender cardigan despite the August heat, and the scent rolled out from the doorway behind her like a physical presence. Not pleasant, but cloying, almost medicinal in its intensity. The woman explained that the flies appeared every afternoon in the same room, always around the same time, no matter what she did. She'd tried hanging strips, setting out vinegar traps, keeping the windows sealed. Nothing worked. They came anyway, materializing as if from nowhere, and disappeared just as mysteriously an hour later. Her voice carried the flat exhaustion of someone who'd stopped expecting to be believed. I followed her through a dim hallway lined with empty frames, the kind that come with the glass still in them, never filled with photographs. The house smelled wrong beneath the lavender. Not decay exactly, but something organic and purposeful, like a greenhouse left untended. The walls seemed to absorb sound. My footsteps fell dead against the hardwood, producing no echo. The room in question was a small den at the back of the house. 2 windows faced the overgrown yard, their panes clouded with years of grime. A wingback chair sat angled toward nothing in particular, and there, clustered on the ceiling in the far corner, were perhaps 24 flies, the dark, stocky kind that entomologists call phorids. but lay people know as coffin flies, scuttle flies, or, more poetically, film flies. I checked my watch again. 2:01 p.m. The woman stood in the doorway, not entering, her hands clasped in front of her cardigan. She mentioned that the attic access was in the hall closet, said something about checking up there, and then retreated before I could ask any follow-up questions. The flies continued their erratic patrol of the ceiling, their buzz low and oddly synchronized, like a distant engine. The attic ladder unfolded with a groan of springs. The smell hit me before I'd climbed 3 rungs, that same lavender scent but concentrated now, almost nauseating in its sweetness. My flashlight beam swept across fiberglass insulation and old 2x4s, and then caught something that made me pause. Cork panels, perhaps a dozen of them, arranged in a careful grid along the northern wall. I climbed the rest of the way up, crouching beneath the low rafters. Each cork panel had been mounted on plywood backing and secured to the wall studs with finishing nails. Dozens of pins pierced each board, not random but arranged in precise rows and columns. And affixed to each pin was a photograph, maybe 2 inches square, printed on glossy paper that caught the flashlight beam. I moved closer. Wings. Every photograph showed insect wings in extreme close-up. Not the dried specimens you'd see in an entomology collection, but living wings, the kind of shots that required a macro lens and a subject held perfectly still. The venation was clearly visible, the tiny hairs along the edges, the subtle gradations of transparency. Some appeared to be flies, others perhaps wasps or beetles. Each photo was numbered in small, neat handwriting. 247, 248, 249, continuing across all 12 boards. Beneath the cork panels sat a workbench I hadn't noticed at first. Glass jars lined the back edge, the kind used for canning, each containing something suspended in clear liquid. I didn't want to look closer, but the flashlight beam had a will of its own. Specimens, preserved in what smelled like rubbing alcohol when I unscrewed one lid. Not whole insects, but parts. Thoraxes, abdomens, wing casings, each labeled with a date and number on masking tape. The most recent date was from 4 days ago. My beam found the microfan next, a small desktop model pointed directly at an air vent. It wasn't running, but when I traced the cord, it led to a power strip, which connected to an extension cord, which snaked down through a hole drilled in the floorboards. I followed it with the flashlight until it disappeared. The subfloor beneath the insulation felt damp when I tested it with my fingers. Not wet, but tacky, as if something had been spilled and partially absorbed. The moisture had a faint sheen to it, and when I brought my hand close to my face, that lavender smell intensified. I wiped my fingers on my pants, fighting the urge to descend the ladder immediately. That's when I noticed the gap. Along the eave, where the roof met the wall, someone had pried back a piece of trim. The gap was perhaps 2 inches wide, offering a narrow view of the backyard below. The wood around it showed finger marks in the accumulated dust. Not old marks, but recent, the oils from skin still visible. Someone had been up here, looking out, watching. Watching what? I descended quickly, my pulse doing something uncomfortable in my throat. The woman wasn't in the hallway. I called out, heard no response, and made my way to the back den. The flies were still there, though fewer now, and those remaining seemed lethargic, crawling rather than flying. I checked my watch. 2:47 p.m. I found her in the kitchen, standing at the sink with her back to me, washing something I couldn't see. When I mentioned what I'd found in the attic, the panels, the photographs, the preservation jars, she continued washing, her shoulders moving in small, repetitive circles. She explained in that same flat voice that the previous tenant had been some kind of researcher, left everything behind when the lease ended. She hadn't touched any of it, didn't know what it meant, lived alone and barely went up there anyway. The explanation was too smooth, too practiced. And she'd said the previous tenant, but the dates on those jars were recent. This week, yesterday. I told her I'd need to file a report, that what I'd found warranted a follow-up inspection. She nodded without turning around, her hands still moving in the soapy water. I let myself out, conscious of her reflection in the kitchen window, or rather the absence of it, the glass showing only the wavering image of the backyard beyond. From the sidewalk, I glanced up at the eave where that gap had been. In the shadows beneath the overhang, I could just make out a pale shape that might have been a hand or a face, or nothing at all. Just the play of afternoon light on weathered wood. I drove straight to the office and filed my report. Recommended a follow-up inspection, possible code violations, concerns about unlicensed biological research. My supervisor skimmed it, nodded, and filed it in the stack marked non-urgent. These things take time, he assured me. Bureaucracy moves slowly. That night, I lay in bed in my apartment 12 miles away and heard it at 2 a.m. exactly. A low buzzing that seemed to come from inside the walls. I got up, checked every room, found nothing. The sound stopped at 2:03 a.m. The next afternoon, I was inspecting a restaurant kitchen downtown when it started again. 2:00 p.m., that same synchronized buzz. I looked up, expecting to see flies on the ceiling, but there was nothing. The sound continued for exactly 3 minutes. It happened again the day after. And the day after that. Always at 2 p.m. Always lasting 3 minutes. Always that same low, purposeful buzzing that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and resonate in the bones of my skull. I drove back to the house on Monito Park. The yard looked even more overgrown, as if weeks rather than days had passed. I knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. I tried the door, unlocked. The lavender smell had intensified, now mixed with something else. Something faintly chemical that coated the back of my throat. The hallway frames were no longer empty. Each contained a photograph, printed on the same glossy paper as the wing photos in the attic. Except these showed rooms, my apartment, my office, the inside of my van. Taken from angles that shouldn't have been possible unless someone had been inside, hiding, watching. The most recent photo showed my bedroom from the corner of the ceiling, my bed visible below, and I could see myself sleeping, my face turned toward the camera. I should have run. Every rational impulse screamed at me to leave, to call the police, to never return. Instead, I climbed the attic ladder one more time. The corkboards had multiplied. They now covered 3 walls, hundreds of photographs, thousands of pins. The numbers had progressed far beyond what I'd seen before. 1,847, 1,848, 1,849. And the photographs had changed. They were no longer just wings, but whole insects, and not just insects, but other things. Fragments of text, equations, diagrams of rooms I recognized as being from my own apartment. And interspersed throughout were close-ups of eyes, human eyes, my eyes, photographed in such extreme detail that I could see the individual cells in my irises. The jars had been rearranged in a pattern that resembled a circuit diagram. Wires now connected them, thin copper strands running from lid to lid. The microfan was running, oscillating slowly, pushing air through that gap in the eave, and positioned directly in the airflow was a new jar, larger than the others, containing not specimens, but something that moved, writhed, actually, in a way that made my stomach lurch. I heard footsteps on the ladder behind me, slow, deliberate, unhurried. The woman's voice came from the darkness below, but it sounded different now, layered somehow, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. She asked if I understood yet. She asked if I could feel it. The pattern, the connection, the way certain frequencies could carry information across distances. She asked if I noticed the timing, the precision, the beautiful mathematics of it all. I turned toward the ladder, but the opening was dark, impossibly dark, as if the hallway below had been replaced with something else entirely. The buzzing started again, but not from any direction I could identify. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from inside my head and outside it simultaneously. The woman, or the thing that had been pretending to be a woman, continued speaking from the darkness. She explained that she'd been collecting specimens for 17 years, that she'd finally found the right frequencies, the right combinations, that she'd been searching for someone with the right sensitivity, someone whose nervous system could serve as a receiver. that the flies weren't the experiment. I was. She said that every afternoon at 2 p.m., my consciousness synchronized with the patterns she'd recorded. That the photographs weren't documentation but calibration, each one fine-tuning the connection. That I'd been transmitting data back to her without knowing it. Everything I saw, everything I thought, everything I was. I don't remember climbing down the ladder or leaving the house. My next clear memory is of sitting in my van 3 blocks away, my hands shaking too badly to start the engine, watching the dashboard clock turn to 2:47 p.m. I filed a police report that evening. The officers listened with increasing skepticism, took notes that I'm certain were never transcribed, and eventually drove to the address I provided. They returned 20 minutes later to tell me the house had been vacant for 8 months, that the owner lived in Seattle and confirmed no one had been renting it. They suggested I might be overtired, possibly dehydrated in the summer heat. Stress does strange things to people in my line of work, one officer offered sympathetically. I went back the next morning. The house was different. The paint wasn't old tooth yellow, but a fresh sage green. The lawn was recently mowed. The windows were clean. A for lease sign stood in the yard with a property management company's number. I walked around to the back, looked up at the eave. No gap, no shadow, no hand. Just weathered wood and the ordinary architecture of an ordinary house. But every afternoon at 2 p.m. I hear it. The buzzing, sometimes in my apartment, sometimes at job sites, sometimes while I'm driving. It follows me, or I follow it. I can't tell anymore. And it's changing. The pattern is becoming more complex, more articulate. Yesterday I could almost make out words in it. Today, I'm certain I can. It's telling me things. About the nature of consciousness, about the spaces between seconds, about what happens to observation when the observer becomes the observed. It's teaching me to see the way she sees, or the way something sees through her, something that's been watching from gaps and shadows and corners where the light doesn't quite reach. I've started taking photographs, just small ones at first, printed on glossy paper, wings mostly. I'm up to number 83. I'm not sure why I'm doing it, but the patterns are so beautiful, so intricate. There's a rhythm to it that feels necessary, inevitable, like breathing. My landlord called yesterday, asked if I was planning to renew my lease. I told him I wasn't sure, that I might have found somewhere else. He asked where, and I couldn't remember answering, but he seemed satisfied with whatever I said. I've been spending my evenings measuring things, the dimensions of rooms, the angles of light, the frequency of ambient sounds. I've been recording everything in a notebook, numbers and equations that I don't consciously understand, but that feel correct somehow, like remembering a language I never learned. There's an attic access in my apartment building. I've never noticed it before, but now I can't stop thinking about it. About what might be up there, waiting. About the corkboards I could mount, the specimens I could preserve, the patterns I could map. It's 1:47 p.m. now. I can feel it building, that familiar pressure behind my eyes, that sense of something vast and patient turning its attention toward me. In 13 minutes, the buzzing will start. In 13 minutes, I'll understand a little more. In 13 minutes, I'll be a little less myself and a little more something else. I've started wearing lavender, just a drop on my collar. It helps, somehow. Makes the transition smoother, the boundaries less distinct. The woman, I think I saw her yesterday, or someone like her, standing at a bus stop on Monroe Street. She was watching a house across the street, her head tilted at an angle that didn't seem quite right. When I drove past again 10 minutes later, she was gone, but there were finger marks in the dust on a nearby windowsill. I'm not afraid anymore. Fear implies resistance, and resistance feels increasingly pointless. Instead, there's a growing curiosity about what happens next, about where these patterns lead, about what I'm becoming. It's 1:58 p.m. The first fly just appeared on my ceiling. Materialized is the better word. As if crossing some threshold from elsewhere, it's crawling in a perfect circle. And I realize I've seen this exact pattern before, in one of those photographs, pinned to one of those cork boards. It's 1:59 p.m. The buzzing is starting early today. building in volume and complexity. I can hear words now, clear and distinct. Measurements, coordinates, frequencies, instructions for something I don't remember agreeing to, but that I'm already preparing to carry out. It's 2 p.m. I understand now. There was never a woman in that house. There was never a house at all, not really. Just a frequency, a pattern, a way of organizing information that learned to use matter the way I use tools. It's been here for a long time, cycling through observers, refining its methods, perfecting its transmission, and now it's my turn to watch, to collect, to calibrate. I've already found my first subject, a house 3 blocks from here, vacant but not empty. There's an attic access, and I have all the equipment I need: cork boards, pins, glass jars, a microfan. I've been making photographs without remembering taking them, hundreds of them, arranged in patterns that will make perfect sense to the next receiver, because there will be a next one. There always is. The buzzing is everywhere now, not just in my head but in the walls, the air, the spaces between heartbeats. It's not a sound at all, I realize. It's a carrier wave, and I'm the signal it's been waiting to transmit. It's 2:03 p.m. The fly on my ceiling has been joined by 23 others. I know it's 23 without counting. I know their exact positions, their flight patterns, the frequencies of their wing beats. I know everything they know, everything they see, and through them, I can see back across 17 years of observations, hundreds of receivers, thousands of transmissions. I can see the woman, the first woman, the one who started this, who found the pattern in her research and let it find her back. She's still out there, somewhere, cycling through forms, through faces, through the infinite variations of observer and observed. And I can see forward, too, to the person who will receive my calibrations, who will sit in their apartment or house or car and hear the buzzing start at 2 p.m. and wonder where it's coming from in their glass jars. I'll do so with the precise movements of someone who's done this 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different forms, all of us watching, all of us waiting, all of us transmitting the pattern forward through time and flesh and the terrible mathematics of consciousness itself. I should be terrified. I should run. But it's so beautiful, this pattern. So elegant. So inevitable. And in 13 hours at 2 a.m., someone 12 miles away will hear the buzzing for the first time and wonder where it's coming from. And I'll know, because I'll be the one sending it. The way someone sent it to me. The way someone will send it forward forever. Each of us a receiver and a transmitter, a witness and a watched, a fly pinned to cork and a hand holding the pin simultaneously and eternally. It's 2:08 p.m. I'm starting to forget my name, but I remember the numbers: 1,847, 1,848, 1,849, and I know what comes next. In Story 7. The dream started in March, when the frost was still clinging to the Pennsylvania ground like something that didn't want to let go. Every night the same field. Every night the same moment. High noon, when shadows shrink to nothing and there's nowhere left to hide from the light. The grass was tall and bleached pale by summer sun that shouldn't exist in winter, moving in waves that had no relationship to wind. And standing at the far edge, near a line of trees I couldn't quite focus on, was a woman in a gray dress, not moving, not calling out, just standing there with her back to me, one arm raised and pointing toward something I couldn't see. The first dozen times, I woke before reaching her. My heart would be racing, sheets damp with sweat that smelled wrong, like old paper and disturbed earth. I'd tell myself it was stress. The move to Pennsylvania had been harder than expected, the new job demanding, the isolation of rural life more profound than I'd anticipated. Dreams were just the mind's way of processing, I'd read somewhere. Nothing to worry about. But then she turned around. I don't remember her face. That's the thing that bothers me most when I try to recall it now. I can see the dress, simple, long, the color of thunderclouds. I can see her hands, pale and thin, gesturing for me to come closer. But her face is a blur in my memory, like a photograph left too long in water. What I do remember is her voice, though I'm not certain I heard it with my ears. It seemed to come from inside my skull, patient and insistent. "Come to the noonday sun." That's all she said. The same 5 words, over and over, until they lost meaning and became just rhythm and pressure. I started keeping a notebook by my bed, sketching what I could remember when I woke. The field took shape across pages. Gentle hills, a single prominent oak tree, a stone wall running along one side. The details accumulated with unsettling consistency. In most dreams, things shift and change. Memory plays tricks. But this place remained constant, as if I was visiting the same location rather than creating it. My therapist suggested it might be a composite memory, something from childhood I'd forgotten. I'd grown up in Ohio, but perhaps a family trip or a photograph buried in some box might explain it. The explanation felt thin even as she offered it, and I could see in her careful expression that she didn't quite believe it either. The turning point came in late April. I was driving home from work, taking the long route through the back roads because the highway construction had become unbearable. The GPS guided me along narrow lanes between fields that were just beginning to green. And then, as I crested a small hill, I saw it. The field from my dreams. Not similar, not reminiscent, identical. The same rolling slope, the same distant tree line, the same stone wall overgrown with wild roses that wouldn't bloom for another month. My hands clenched the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles went white. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Pattern recognition, selective memory, confirmation bias. But my gut knew better. I pulled onto the shoulder, engine still running, and stared. There was no woman in a gray dress. No impossible summer sun at 6:47 p.m. in April. Just an empty field beside a 2-lane road, marked by a small wooden sign I hadn't noticed in my dreams. Linden Creek Park. Historic site. I should have driven away. Instead, I took a photograph with my phone, pulled back onto the road, and continued home, where I spent the evening searching property records and historical archives for Lancaster County. Linden Creek Park was established in 1979 on land that had once been part of a larger farm. Before that, the records grew sparse, a patchwork of owners, foreclosures, and estate sales going back to the 1800s. Nothing remarkable. Nothing to explain why I'd been dreaming about it for 2 months. That night, the dream changed. The woman was still there, but closer now, standing beside the oak tree I'd noticed in the real field. She didn't speak. She just pressed both palms against the trunk and looked at me with that blur where her face should be. Then she knelt and began digging at the base of the tree with her bare hands. I woke at 3:47 a.m. with dirt under my fingernails. I turned on every light in my apartment and examined my hands under the bathroom's harsh fluorescent glow. The dirt was real, dark and loamy, still slightly damp. I hadn't been sleepwalking. I was certain of that. My shoes were by the door where I'd left them. My keys were on the kitchen counter. The deadbolt was still locked from the inside, but my fingernails were black with soil. I called in sick the next day and drove back to Linden Creek Park. The entrance was easy to miss, just a gap in the trees with a gravel parking area barely large enough for 3 cars. No other vehicles, no people, just me and the morning sun and that field stretching out exactly as I'd seen it month after month. The oak tree stood on a low rise about 200 yards from the parking area. Walking toward it felt like moving through water, each step requiring more effort than it should. The air seemed thicker near the tree, heavy with the smell of things growing and things decomposing, all mixed together into something that made my sinuses ache. The tree was old, its trunk twisted and scarred, roots breaking through the surface of the ground in thick coils. And there, half buried among those roots, was a stone marker tilted at an odd angle, its face pressed toward the earth. My hands were shaking as I knelt beside it. The stone was weathered limestone, rough beneath my fingers. I shouldn't touch it, shouldn't disturb what was clearly part of some old grave or monument. But I could feel the weight of those dreams pressing against the back of my skull, and that voice, "Come to the noonday sun," seemed to echo in the rustling leaves above. I cleared away the loose soil and carefully tilted the stone upward. The name carved into its face was my own surname. Not a common name, not something you'd expect to find randomly. The letters were uneven, carved by hand, possibly by someone unskilled or in distress. Below the name should have been dates, but there was only blank stone where numbers had been deliberately chiseled away, leaving rough scars in the limestone. I sat back on my heels, mind racing. Family history I didn't know about, some distant relative buried in an unmarked grave. But why would I dream about it? Why the woman? Why the insistent summons to this exact spot? I took photographs from every angle, made notes on my phone about the exact location, then carefully lowered the stone back into position. The walk back to my car felt longer than the walk out, and twice I had the overwhelming sensation of being followed. But when I turned, there was only the empty field and that ancient oak tree, its branches swaying in wind I couldn't feel. That night I waited for the dream. I'd made tea, sat up in bed with my laptop, researching genealogy sites and cemetery records. I wanted to be ready, wanted to have questions prepared if the woman appeared again. But when sleep finally took me, the dream was different. I stood in the field at noon, just as always, but the woman was gone. The sky was the wrong shade of blue, too bright, too intense, as if someone had oversaturated a photograph. And I could hear footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, moving through grass that shouldn't have made any sound. I tried to turn around in the dream, but my body wouldn't respond. The footsteps came closer, then stopped, and I heard the sound of hands striking earth, a flat, hollow sound, rhythmic and purposeful. Thump, thump, thump. 3 times, then silence. I woke to my phone's alarm, throat raw as if I'd been screaming. The apartment felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The morning light came through the windows at an angle that seemed slightly off. The hum of the refrigerator was pitched too low. Everything familiar had been shifted just enough to feel alien. Work was impossible. I sat through meetings without hearing the words, stared at my computer screen without seeing it. My boss asked if I was feeling well. I assured him I was fine, just a touch of spring allergies. The lie felt important, as if admitting what was happening would somehow make it more real. Driving home, my GPS activated without prompting. The screen flickered, then displayed a route that diverged from my usual path. A turn I hadn't requested, leading toward Linden Creek Park. I ignored it and continued straight. The GPS immediately announced it was recalculating. The new route again tried to guide me toward the park, this time via a service road I didn't recognize. Recalculating. 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 The voice became insistent, almost frantic. I turned the GPS off, but the screen stayed lit, still showing that insistent blue line leading to the park. I pulled over and restarted the device. When it powered back on, it opened directly to navigation, the route already plotted to Linden Creek Park. The estimated arrival time read 12 p.m. noon. I threw the GPS into the back seat and drove home using only the road signs and my memory. But 3 times the car seemed to pull slightly to the right, as if the steering had developed a subtle drift, always at intersections where a turn would have taken me toward the park. I made an appointment with my doctor. She ran blood tests, checked my blood pressure, asked careful questions about my stress levels and sleep quality. Everything came back normal. She suggested I might be experiencing anxiety and offered a prescription. I accepted it, filled it at the pharmacy, and set the bottle on my bathroom counter where it remained untouched. Because anxiety doesn't explain the dirt, it doesn't explain the gravestone with my family name, and it doesn't explain what happened next. I started seeing the woman during the day, just glimpses at first, a flash of gray fabric in my peripheral vision, a silhouette in a window across the street, a figure standing at the far end of a grocery store aisle. Never long enough to focus on, never substantial enough to be certain, but always there, always watching, always wearing that gray dress. My coworkers began avoiding me. I could see it in how they averted their eyes when I entered the break room, how conversations faltered when I approached. I'd look in the bathroom mirror and see myself as they must see me. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, clothes rumpled, hands that couldn't stop shaking. I stopped going to Linden Creek Park, but that didn't matter. The park was coming to me. My apartment began to smell like earth, that same rich, loamy scent I'd noticed at the base of the oak tree. I scrubbed the floors, replaced the air filters, left windows open even when it rained. The smell persisted. My neighbor asked if I'd been doing gardening, mentioned that soil had been tracked in the hallway outside my door. I hadn't been gardening. I hadn't been anywhere near dirt. The GPS in my car had become possessed. It no longer mattered whether I turned it on or off. It would activate itself, plot routes to Linden Creek Park, recalculate obsessively when I deviated. The service road it kept trying to guide me down didn't exist on any map I checked. I even drove past the supposed turnoff during daylight, found only an overgrown fence line and a ditch thick with brambles. But the GPS insisted the road was there, showed it clearly on the screen, calculated precise turn-by-turn directions to reach the park via a route that was physically impossible. I tried changing the destination, entering random addresses across the state. The GPS would accept the input, then immediately reroute back to Linden Creek Park. I took the device to an electronics store. The technician couldn't find anything wrong with it. He reset it to factory settings while I watched. The moment it powered back on, it opened to navigation. Destination: Linden Creek Park. Arrival time: 12 p.m. The dreams had become unbearable. Every night I stood in that field while footsteps approached from behind. Every night I heard that hollow sound of hands striking earth. Thump, thump, thump. And every morning I woke with more dirt under my nails, despite locking my apartment door and windows, despite sleeping in gloves, despite every precaution I could imagine. I began to research the park's history more desperately. The County Historical Society had little information. The land had been privately owned for most of its existence, changing hands through inheritance and occasional sales. One librarian mentioned that the area had a reputation for being unlucky. Farmers who worked those fields supposedly had more accidents, more failed crops, more unexplained misfortunes than their neighbors. But these were just stories, she assured me with a nervous smile. Nothing documented, nothing proven. I found one old newspaper article from 1891 describing a search party that had combed the area looking for a woman who'd gone missing from a nearby town. The description was brief. She'd been last seen walking toward the old Hartwell property, wearing a gray dress. The search was called off after 3 days. Her name was never mentioned, just the unfortunate woman, and later the deceased, though no body was ever recovered. The oak tree in my dreams was called the Hartwell Oak in some records. The property line had shifted over the years, but that tree marked what had once been the center of their land. I should have connected it earlier, should have seen the pattern. But I was so focused on the surname on that gravestone, I'd missed everything else. The woman had never said her name, never told me why she needed me at the noonday sun. She'd only gestured, dug at the base of that tree, and waited. Last week, I drove to Linden Creek Park one final time. I told myself I needed closure, needed to see the place in full daylight and prove to myself it was just a field, just a tree, just a weathered stone with a name that might not even be connected to my family. I arrived at 11:47 a.m. The field was exactly as I'd always seen it. Pale grass, rolling hills, that ancient oak standing sentinel on its low rise. The sky was cloudless, the sun climbing toward its zenith. I checked my watch obsessively as I walked toward the tree. 11:52, 11:54, 11:57. The gravestone was still there among the roots, still tilted at that odd angle. I knelt beside it but didn't touch it this time. Just looked at my family name carved into its weathered face and wondered whose hands had chiseled those letters, whose body might rest beneath this unnamed marker. My watch read 11:59. The air grew thick and still. The rustling of leaves stopped. Even the distant sound of traffic on the county road faded to nothing. And in that profound silence I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, moving through grass that made no sound. I didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. My body had locked rigid, every muscle tensed, breath caught in my throat. The footsteps came closer, circling around the right side of the tree, and I could smell earth and something else, something old and patient, and absolutely certain. A shadow fell across the gravestone, though the sun was directly overhead. Thump, thump, thump. 3 impacts of hands striking earth, so close I could feel the vibration through my knees. I forced myself to look up. She stood between me and the tree, close enough to touch. The gray dress hung still in the windless noon, and her hands were pale and thin and streaked with dark soil. But her face was the blur I'd always seen in dreams, as if reality itself refused to focus on those features. But within that blur, I could sense eyes looking at me with an expression I couldn't name. Not anger, not pleading, something else. Something that made my chest ache and my hands clench and my mind scramble for any explanation that didn't require acknowledging what I was seeing. She raised one hand and pointed downward, at the gravestone, at the carved name, at the earth beneath. Then she spoke, and her voice was inside my head and all around me and seemed to come from the ground itself. Come to the noonday sun. My watch read 12 o'clock exactly, and I understood. Finally, horribly, I understood. Not who she was, not why my name was on that stone, but what she wanted, what she'd always wanted. She needed me to dig. I don't remember leaving the park. I found myself back in my car at 12:43, hands covered in dirt up to the wrists, a smear of soil across my face. The GPS was active, showing a route back to my apartment. No recalculating, no insistent diversions, just a simple route home. The dream stopped that night. I should feel relieved. I should feel like I've escaped something. But I keep thinking about what I might have found if I'd started digging. Keep wondering whose body might be wrapped in the roots of that tree. Keep asking myself why my family name was carved into stone, and then deliberately obscured, as if someone wanted to both mark and hide what lay beneath. Yesterday, I received a notice from the County Historical Society. They're planning to expand Linden Creek Park, and part of that expansion involves removing the old Hartwell oak. The tree is diseased, they explain, and poses a danger to visitors. The removal is scheduled for next month. They'll be bringing in equipment to extract the stump and roots. I wonder what they'll find buried there. I wonder if they'll call me when they find it. And late at night, when I can't sleep, I wonder if I should tell them about the gravestone, about the dreams, about the woman in gray who stood at noon and pointed at the earth and asked, no, demanded, that I come. But I don't think I will. Because some part of me knows that what's buried beneath that tree isn't finished. That the removal of those roots is exactly what she's been waiting for. That I was never meant to dig. I was meant to bear witness when someone else finally did. My GPS turned itself on this morning while I was eating breakfast. I hadn't touched it, hadn't brought it in from the car, but I could hear its tinny voice from the parking lot, muffled but insistent, repeating the same words over and over. Recalculating, recalculating, recalculating. I haven't checked what route it's trying to show me. I don't think I need to. The noonday sun casts no shadows. There's nowhere to hide when everything is illuminated. And I think that's what she's been trying to tell me all along. That some things can't stay buried forever. That time and roots and truth have a way of breaking through the earth. And that when they finally called my name, I answered. I just don't know yet what it will cost me. Story 8. The apartment smelled like someone else's coffee when I arrived. Not stale, but recent, as if whoever brewed it had just stepped out for a cigarette. My colleague had left 3 days earlier for a conference in Singapore, yet the aroma hung in the kitchen with an insistence that made me check the coffee maker twice. Unplugged, cold, the pot bone dry. Providence in February is a study in gray, the kind of gray that seeps through windows and settles in your chest, making you forget what sunlight feels like. The apartment occupied the 3rd floor of a converted textile mill on the east side, all exposed brick and ductwork that groaned with phantom purposes. My colleague had warned me about the heating system's eccentricities, but he hadn't mentioned the timing. 3:17 a.m. every night. The first time it happened, I thought I'd dreamed it. That particular metallic clunk of old pipes coming to life, followed by the hiss of steam forcing its way through decades of corrosion. But I was awake, staring at the ceiling where shadows from the street accumulated in the corners like dark water pooling. The radiator beneath the window ticked and pinged as it heated, a rhythm almost conversational, as if the building itself were settling in for a long talk. Then came the beep. Single, sharp, somewhere in the hallway. I waited, counting seconds in the dark. Nothing followed, just that one abbreviated chirp, like a smoke detector testing its own existence. I'd done enough house-sitting to know the sound. Low battery usually, though I'd checked them all that afternoon. Every single one showed green. Sleep came eventually, but thin and unsatisfying, the kind that leaves you more tired than if you'd stayed awake. The second night, I was ready. Phone in hand, 3:16 displayed in cold blue numerals. I watched the numbers flip to 3:17, and right on schedule, the pipes began their nightly percussion. I sat up, muscles tense, waiting. The beep came 30 seconds later, and this time I was moving, padding barefoot into the hallway. The apartment's layout was simple. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room, and a hallway connecting them all. Off that hallway was a closet, deep, the kind that runs back under the building's original architecture, with walls that don't quite match the rest of the construction. I'd hung my coat there the first day without thinking much about it. I stood in the hallway, listening. The building made its night sounds, radiators ticking down, someone's television murmuring through the floor, the distant hum of the boiler in the basement. But underneath it all, I detected something else. A draft. Cool air moving where it shouldn't, coming from beneath the closet door. I opened it quickly before I could think better of it, and felt the temperature drop 5 degrees. The draft was stronger here, coming from the back of the closet, from the seams where the walls met. I pressed my palm against the wood and felt it there. Not just air, but air moving with purpose, like breath against a harmonica. In and out. A steady rhythm that had nothing to do with ventilation. The smoke detector beeped again, right above my head this time, and I nearly shouted. But when I looked up, the green light blinked steadily, innocent and electronic. Nothing wrong. Nothing at all. I closed the closet door and went back to bed, but the cold air had followed me somehow, settling around my ankles like an invisible fog. The third night, I prepared. Before climbing into bed, I took a plastic cup from the kitchen, one of those red Solo cups that appear in every American apartment like a native species, and wedged it between the closet door and the frame. Solid. Secure. If anything opened that door, I'd hear it. 3:17 came and went with its usual fanfare of groaning pipes. The beep sounded. I lay there, eyes open, waiting. The apartment felt different tonight, the darkness heavier somehow, pressing down with weight that darkness shouldn't have. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in the silence, and beneath it, maybe, just maybe, another breath matching pace with mine. The cup hit the floor at 4:23 a.m. Not a crash, just a small plastic tick, as it bounced once on hardwood and rolled. I didn't move, couldn't move. My body had locked up, every muscle frozen in a state between fight and flight that chose neither. I stared at the bedroom doorway, at the rectangle of lesser darkness that marked the threshold, and waited for something to fill it. Nothing came. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Finally, I forced myself upright, turned on every light between the bedroom and the hallway, and looked. The cup lay on its side 3 feet from the closet door, which remained closed, tightly closed, as if it had never been otherwise. I picked up the cup, examined it for damage, found none. The closet door's surface was smooth and unmarked, the frame undisturbed. But when I opened it, the cold air hit me like a wave, and I could smell it now. Not just the damp wood odor of old construction, but something else. Cigarette smoke, stale and embedded, as if someone had been chain-smoking in that narrow space for hours. My colleague didn't smoke. Had been adamant about it, in fact, when giving me the keys. The building was non-smoking. Had been for years, according to the lease agreement hanging on the refrigerator. I grabbed a flashlight and aimed it into the closet's depths. The beam caught dust motes swirling in that impossible draft, and beyond them, where the closet narrowed and disappeared into darkness, I thought I saw something shift. Just a shadow, just the way light bends around corners. But my hindbrain, that ancient lizard part that kept our ancestors alive on the savannah, screamed that I was wrong. I closed the door, locked it. There was a latch, brass and tarnished, that I'd never noticed before. Clicked it into place and backed away. Then I called the building supervisor. She arrived at 9 a.m., a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, and the weary competence of someone who'd seen every possible apartment catastrophe. I explained about the cold air, the smell, the drafts. Left out the other parts, the beeping, the cup, the feeling of being watched. Those details felt too thin, too easily dismissed as imagination or stress. She opened the closet, leaned in, sniffed, frowned. "Someone's been smoking in here," she said, not a question, but an accusation. It wasn't me. I don't smoke, and I thought the building, nobody smokes, not allowed. She pulled out her phone, turned on its flashlight, and swept the beam across the closet's interior. "But I smell it. Recent, too. You have guests?" "No, no one. I've been alone since I got here." She gave me a long look, the kind that calculates and measures and finds you wanting. "I'm the only one with a master key. You, your friend, and me. That's it. These new electronic locks." She tapped the brushed steel mechanism. "They keep a log. I can check." "Please," I said, meaning it. She left after poking around for another 20 minutes, checking windows and walls, running her hands along the edges of things. Found nothing. Promised to send someone from maintenance to look at the ventilation. But her expression, as she left, held a skepticism that made my skin prickle. I spent that day trying to work, trying to focus on the laptop screen and the emails that needed responses, but my attention kept drifting to the closet door. Locked. Still locked. But somehow the latch seemed less substantial than it had before, as if locks were suggestions rather than barriers. At noon, I walked to the hardware store 6 blocks away and bought a new deadbolt. The heavy kind, solid brass that required screws 2 inches long. Spent an hour installing it, drilling carefully so as not to damage my colleague's door, threading the bolts through metal plates. When I finished, the closet was sealed like a bank vault. I felt better, safer, the kind of illusory safety that comes from action, from doing something concrete in the face of ambiguity. That night, I didn't wait for 3:17. I stayed up, laptop open, pretending to watch a movie but really just listening. The building settled around me. Pipes groaned their evening song. Somewhere above, footsteps crossed a floor with the irregular rhythm of pacing. 3:17 arrived. The heating system engaged with its usual complaint. 30 seconds later, the smoke detector beeped. I was already moving toward it when I smelled the smoke. Not the stale embedded odor from the closet, but fresh cigarette smoke, acrid and immediate, as if someone were standing in the hallway lighting up. I spun, searching for the source, but saw only empty space and the ribbon of gray that curled from beneath the closet door. The door I'd locked. The door I'd reinforced with a deadbolt that would require a battering ram to breach. Smoke continued to seep out, growing thicker, and with it came the cold air, that breathing draft that pulsed like something alive. I stood there, frozen again, watching gray tendrils explore the hallway, reaching along the ceiling with purposeful intelligence. Then the smoke detector really went off. Not a single beep, but a sustained shriek that split the night wide open. I didn't think. I ran to the wall and pulled the fire alarm. The building's ancient fire suppression system hadn't been used in decades. When the sprinklers engaged, they did so with the enthusiasm of something long imprisoned, suddenly freed. Water exploded from ceiling fixtures. Not a gentle rain, but a deluge. A biblical punishment that soaked everything in seconds. and from beneath the closet door, water began to flow. Not clean water, gray water, dingy and thick, carrying with it the detritus of hidden spaces. Cigarette ash, a sodden mass of paper, something that might have been fabric, once white, now yellowed and rotting. I stood in the hallway, water streaming down my face, watching that foul tide spread across the hardwood, and I felt something break inside my chest. Not relief, not fear, something else. Something that tasted like understanding but felt like despair. The fire department came. The building supervisor came. Tenants gathered in the hallway, angry and dripping, demanding explanations I couldn't provide. The firefighters checked the closet, found nothing burning, declared it a malfunction. Maintenance would investigate the water damage. The supervisor glared at me with an expression that promised consequences. When they finally left, when the water had been shut off and the hallway cleared and the sprinklers stopped their weeping, I approached the closet door. My new deadbolt hung crooked, the screws I'd so carefully installed stripped loose by water or time or something that cared nothing for locks. I opened the door. The interior was soaked, walls streaming but otherwise empty. No hidden passages, no secret spaces, just a closet, normal and mundane, with wire hangers tinkling against each other in the draft from the broken ventilation. But in the back, where the water had pooled deepest, I found it. A library card. Recent, not weathered or aged. The plastic still glossy. The name printed clearly in that generic library font. My colleague's name. The one whose apartment this was. But the photo was wrong. Similar, but wrong. Like a mirror image slightly off. Like something that had learned to copy a face but hadn't quite mastered the essential humanity beneath. I dropped it back into the water and backed out of the closet. The building supervisor returned the next morning with a locksmith. They changed all the locks, the apartment door, the deadbolt, the bathroom, everything. She handed me new keys with a ceremony that felt almost ritual, explaining again that she was the only one with a master, that the electronic system had shown no unusual access, that maybe I'd been stressed, maybe I should consider cutting my stay short, maybe my colleague could find someone else. I thanked her and closed the door and stood in the apartment that no longer felt like borrowed space but like a trap I'd walked into willingly. That last night, because I'd already decided it would be the last, already had my suitcase half packed and a hotel room reserved, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the living room with every light on, watching the closet door, waiting for 3:17. It came. The pipes sang their nightly song. The smoke detector stayed mercifully silent. I waited until 5 a.m., until the winter sun began its grudging approach, until I felt safe enough to stand, to stretch, to convince myself I'd won whatever contest this had been. That's when I saw it. The plastic cup. The same red Solo cup I'd used days before, the one that had fallen in the night, stood upright on the hallway floor. Not where it had fallen, not where I'd left it, but positioned between the closet door and the frame, wedged exactly as I'd placed it that first time. I walked over slowly, legs numb, breath shallow. Picked it up. The plastic was dry, completely dry, despite the apartment's lingering dampness from the sprinkler flood. And it was clean, spotless, as if it had been carefully washed and dried and returned to its proper place by someone who understood organization, who appreciated order, who wanted me to know they'd been there. The closet door behind it hung slightly ajar, maybe an inch, maybe less, just enough to suggest the latch hadn't caught properly, just enough to reveal darkness beyond. From that darkness, I heard it, a single soft exhalation, like someone releasing a held breath, like relief, like patience finally rewarded. I left the apartment at 5:47 a.m., suitcase dragging behind me, keys left on the kitchen counter. I didn't close the closet door, didn't turn off the lights, just walked out and kept walking until I reached my car and drove until Providence disappeared in my rearview mirror. My colleague returned from Singapore 2 days later. I told him there'd been a plumbing issue, that I'd had to leave early, that I hoped the damage wasn't too severe. He said not to worry, that these old buildings always had problems, that the super had explained everything. that the closet had been empty when he checked, completely dry, nothing unusual at all. He thanked me for taking care of the place, said I was welcome back anytime. I thanked him and said maybe next time, maybe when I wasn't so busy, maybe never. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my own apartment 3 states away, I smell cigarette smoke. Just for a moment. Just long enough to make me check the closets, the locks, the spaces between walls where old buildings keep their secrets. And sometimes at 3:17 a.m., I wake to the sound of pipes groaning and a single beep from a smoke detector that shows green. And I lie there in the dark, listening, wondering if distance matters at all to things that live in the spaces we don't see, to tenants who never signed a lease and never plan to leave. The cup sits in my kitchen cabinet now. I don't remember packing it, don't remember bringing it home. But there it is, red and plastic and perfectly clean, waiting patiently for the next time I need to wedge something closed. I haven't used it yet. I'm not sure I ever will. Because some doors, once opened, refuse to close completely. And some invitations, once extended, are impossible to revoke. The apartment in Providence still stands. My colleague still lives there. He mentioned, last time we spoke, that the heating system is better now, more predictable, though it still kicks on around 3 a.m. He's learned to sleep through it, he said. Barely notices anymore. I didn't ask about the closet. Didn't ask about the smoke or the cup or the things that breathe against wood. Some questions are better left unasked. But I think about it. Every night at 3:17, I think about it. And sometimes, I wonder if the thing in that closet thinks about me too. If it remembers the person who saw it, who heard it, who pulled the fire alarm rather than open the door and look inside. I wonder if it's still waiting there, patient and eternal, breathing its steady rhythm against the walls. I wonder if it knows I kept the cup. Story 9. No, the playlist updated again at 3:47 a.m. I know because I was awake, staring at my phone screen in the blue darkness of my bedroom, watching the notification materialize like a ghost. 17 new songs, each one exactly 4 minutes and 3 seconds long. The same duration as my favorite climb-up observatory drive, from the bottom of Willow Creek Path to the overlook where the city spreads out like scattered embers. I hadn't told anyone about that route in months, not since the meetup. The cursor blinked in the playlist title field. You're safer with me, updated 47 minutes ago. Anonymous user, always anonymous. Spotify support had been useless, telling me to change my password, enable 2-factor authentication, make my profile private. I'd done all of it. The playlists kept coming. My apartment felt different at night now. The radiator's familiar clank had taken on an interrogative quality, as if something were testing the pipes, learning the building's language. Shadows from the streetlight outside stretched across my ceiling in configurations that seemed too deliberate, too angular. I'd started sleeping with my bedroom door open so I could see down the hallway to the front entrance, though what I expected to see there I couldn't say. It had been 6 weeks since I'd ended things with him. If you could call 3 dates and 24 obsessive messages, things. We'd met at the Madison Velo Club's spring social ride, 50 cyclists weaving through the arboretum in a chattering pack. He'd matched my pace on the return leg, made knowledgeable observations about my bike setup, recommended a local frame builder. Seemed normal enough. Intense, maybe, but the good kind of intense cyclists often are about their sport. The messages started the next day. Good morning texts that arrived before my alarm. Suggestions for routes with GPS coordinates and elevation profiles. Links to sales on components I'd mentioned wanting. At first it felt attentive. By day 3 it felt invasive, like he'd installed himself in my routine without asking permission. I think we should slow down, I'd texted him after a week. This feels like too much too fast. His response came in paragraphs. How he'd never felt this connection before. How we understood each other in a way most people couldn't. How cycling was a metaphor for partnership, and we had perfect cadence together. The words had a rehearsed quality, like he'd been composing them in his head for days, polishing them, waiting for the right moment to deploy this arsenal of intimacy. I'd blocked his number, then his other number, then his Facebook, Instagram, and Strava accounts. That's when the playlist started. The first one appeared 2 days after the block, titled simply Observatory. 37 songs, every single one clocking in at 4:03. I'd scrolled through the track list with a cold feeling spreading through my chest. Not because the songs were threatening, but because they were perfect. Deep cuts from bands I'd mentioned once in passing, obscure B-sides, remixes that existed only on SoundCloud. Someone had done research. Someone had paid attention to every casual reference, every offhand comment, and compiled them into this perfectly curated monument to surveillance. I'd made my Spotify private. He created a new playlist anyway, this time called Safer, then With Me, then Just Me, always anonymous, always updating. Now I stood at my kitchen window in boxers and a t-shirt, looking down at the empty street below. 4th floor walk-up, good sightlines. I'd started cataloging the parked cars, memorizing which ones belonged to neighbors, noting when unfamiliar vehicles appeared. 3 nights ago, a white pickup truck had been idling 2 blocks up, exhaust pluming in the April chill. I'd watched it for 40 minutes before it pulled away, no one getting in or out. Just sitting there with the radio playing something I couldn't quite hear, but could feel as a low vibration in my chest. The building was old enough that sound traveled strangely through it. Conversations from the apartment below arrived as rhythmic murmurs, almost musical. Footsteps from above came in irregular percussion. Late at night, I'd hear what I thought might be someone in the hallway. But when I checked through the peephole, there was never anyone there. Just the long corridor with its carpet worn to threads in the middle, walls painted the color of old paper. I'd filed the police report after finding my helmet on the doormat. That morning I'd been running late, grabbed my keys and wallet, pulled open the door, and there it was, my helmet, the one I'd left locked to my bike in the rack outside. Someone had removed it, brought it upstairs and washed it so thoroughly that the foam padding still felt damp. No scratches, no dirt from the winter riding that had accumulated in every vent and along every edge. It looked factory new. Tucked into the retention system was a note on thermal receipt paper, the kind that would fade to nothing in a few weeks. "You're safer with me." The officer who took my report was young, professional, and clearly dealing with a slow Tuesday. He wrote everything down in a spiral notebook, asked if I had any idea who might be doing this, if there'd been threats. I'd explained about the meetup, the messages, the playlists. He'd nodded with an expression that suggested he'd heard variations of this story before. "Has he made direct contact since?" asked. "The playlist thing. I mean face-to-face, phone calls, letters, physical contact." "No, but the helmet being cleaned, that's concerning. But without evidence it was him specifically, and without a direct threat, there's only so much we can do." He'd glanced around my apartment, taking in the bike hanging from ceiling hooks, the gear sprawled across the living room floor, the Garmin charging on the counter. "You ride alone a lot?" "Usually, yeah. Might want to vary your routes for a while, ride with groups, stay visible." After he left, I'd started noticing the patrol car. Different one each time, but always slowing down as it passed my building. The officer inside glancing up at the windows. It should have made me feel safer. Instead, it confirmed that they believed something was happening, even if they couldn't act on it yet. The white truck had disappeared after the police started their random checks. I'd felt a brief surge of relief, quickly replaced by a new anxiety. If he'd noticed the patrols, that meant he was watching closely enough to spot them. And if he'd backed off in response, that suggested calculation, patience, strategy. This wasn't impulsive obsession. This was methodical. The playlist had kept updating. I'd stopped riding my usual routes, started taking random turns, going out at different times, choosing paths I'd never ridden before. It should have helped. Instead, I'd find myself glancing over my shoulder at every bike that approached from behind, studying every cyclist waiting at intersections, wondering if that person in a jacket and sunglasses 2 blocks back was just another rider, or something else entirely. Last week I'd gone out at 6 in the morning, headed toward the Capitol on streets I rarely used. Took a loop through the Near East Side, cut down to the lake path, pushed hard into a headwind that made my eyes water. I'd felt good, finally, alone with the rhythm of breath and chainring, losing myself in the physical fact of motion. Then I'd noticed the cyclist behind me. Nothing specific, just someone else on the path, maintaining a steady distance. I'd accelerated. They'd accelerated. I'd slowed down. They'd slowed down. I'd glanced back twice but couldn't make out details against the early sun. Found the sticker. It was adhered to my apartment buzzer panel in the building's entryway, a small decal showing a bicycle in profile. Generic enough that I almost missed it. But when I looked closer, I realized it perfectly matched my bike. Same drop bars, same frame geometry, same bottle cage configuration. Not just any bicycle. My bicycle. I'd peeled it off with shaking hands, carried it upstairs, added it to a shoebox that now contained the note, photographs of the playlist notifications,